Chapter 2809. He wasn't a particularly strong person. However, he naturally understood that he couldn't show the slightest bit of weakness at this point in time. No one spoke. Suddenly, a harsh voice was heard. Yi Shiwen, you're just a junior who is cultivated for less than 10,000 years. What makes you think you can be the leader? Everyone was in an uproar. Although this was what many people were thinking, he must be tired of living to have the guts to shout it out in this situation. Did he really want to die? Even if Yi Shiwen wasn't as terrifying as the rumors said, the Hidden King's strength was recognized by everyone. Otherwise, everyone wouldn't have submitted to the Hidden Valley so easily and joined the Hidden Alliance. When everyone looked over, they saw that it was a huge, ferocious beast. It was an evil dragon with 3 heads and 6 arms. Its entire body was golden, and it looked resplendent. It was like a heavenly dragon that protected the Buddha. Its body exuded an extremely tyrannical aura. Yi Shiwen wasn't annoyed. He just said indifferently, "You said that I'm not qualified. Do you think you're qualified? Although I'm not qualified, is there anyone in the Hidden Alliance who is stronger than the Hidden King in terms of martial arts and experience? I recommend the Hidden King to be the leader of the Hidden Alliance." At this time, since they had already spoken, this evil dragon naturally didn't care about Yi Shiwen. In other words, he didn't care about Yi Shiwen at all. Otherwise, he wouldn't have come out to cause trouble. Everyone's eyes were focused on the two of them. They wanted to see what Yi Shiwen would do in the face of such a face-slapping situation. In particular, this evil dragon had spoken out the thoughts of many people. They would naturally have nothing to say if the Hidden King had assumed the role of the Alliance Chief. However, it would be completely different if this person was Yi Shiwen. In fact, they wouldn't be willing to admit that he was the Hidden King. Yi Shiwen smiled slightly. The Hidden King beside him had a gloomy expression. This person naturally couldn't have been arranged by him. Others might not know, but how could he not know Yi Shiwen's strength? How could he have such thoughts? He was very clear that although he was the one doing all the work for the past 100 years, and Yi Shiwen seemed to be just sitting back and enjoying the fruits of others' labor, he was able to subdue everyone because of his tyrannical strength. His tyrannical strength didn't come from anywhere else but from Yi Shiwen. This was enough for Yi Shiwen to sit in the position of the Alliance Chief, especially in such a chaotic world. Everyone would have a backbone in their hearts if there was such a powerful expert to oversee the situation. He knew that he didn't have such strength, so he didn't want to compete with Yi Shiwen. This person's intentions are vicious. Junior brother, he's obviously trying to drive a wedge between the two of us, the Hidden King said. Of course, he did so through the secret voice-ending technique and did not say it directly to the crowd. Brother, don't worry, it's just a small trick. Not worth mentioning. Yi Shiwen didn't take it seriously. This trick might have been very useful in other forces. However, this trick was useless against the Hidden Alliance. That was because the Hidden King had given up the position of the Valley Master of the Hidden Valley on his own accord. He hadn't been forced by Yi Shiwen. Instead, he had done it out of strategic considerations. The 3-headed and 6-armed evil dragon looked at everyone after he finished speaking. He hoped that everyone would agree with him. However, everyone was looking down at him at this time. They didn't want to blindly get involved. They were old foxes and very shrewd. They didn't want to be the first bird to provoke Yi Shiwen's authority. The Hidden King wouldn't let them off even if Yi Shiwen didn't care about it. The so-called, "the gun will shoot the bird that pokes its head out" was nothing more than this. They admitted that they didn't have the strength to withstand the Hidden King's anger and revenge. Moreover, the first bird that had poked its head out would weigh Yi Shiwen's strength. They didn't need to do anything themselves. The evil dragon couldn't help but feel a little depressed when he saw that no one had fallen for his trick. However, he seemed to have anticipated this situation, so he didn't take it to heart. You see, no one has any intention of agreeing with you. What do you have to say? Yi Shiwen seemed to be exceptionally patient today, as he asked indifferently. That's only because everyone was forced by the Secret Alliance's prestige and didn't say anything. I, on the other hand, believe that since the Secret Alliance is going to be established and the Secret Alliance is going to develop, we'll need a good leader. This way, we'll be able to achieve twice the results with half the effort. I believe that everyone here understands this as well. I won't say anything if the Hidden King becomes the Alliance leader. However, I won't accept it if you become the Alliance leader. What virtue or ability do you have to become the Alliance leader of the Hidden Alliance? I think that I'd be better than you if I were in your shoes. You want to come? Yi Shiwen sneered. All right, I'll stand right here. As long as you can make me move a single step, I'll consider it my loss. I'll give you the position of the Alliance leader today. Everyone was in an uproar. They hadn't expected Yi Shiwen to say such words. Many people knew the background of this evil dragon. He was definitely not an ordinary person. If the Hidden King hadn't personally made a move, no one would have been able to subdue him. He didn't belong to any sect or clan. Normally, he was a loose cultivator. Recently, he had been forced by the heavenly race to join the Hidden Alliance. However, although he was a loose cultivator, his strength was extraordinary. Does Yi Shiwen intend to fight him? That's unwise. Even if he's very strong, it might be possible to fight him head-on. However, he's being too careless to make this guy fight and not be able to move. That's right. He's indeed young and full of vigor. He hasn't experienced any hardships. He's still too inexperienced. The scene was quiet. However, everyone's divine senses were intertwined in mid-air. They were communicating silently. Only the people from the Bachin family were silent. They were all very clear about Yi Shiwen's strength. He was able to kill a divine king across domains. They had never heard of such a method. Dealing with a trifling evil dragon was nothing to him. All right, that's what you said. There was a hint of joy in the evil dragon's eyes. It seemed that his plan had succeeded. On the surface, he didn't seem to have any brains. He was even more ferocious. However, in reality, he was a cunning old fox. A man's words are worth their weight in gold. As long as your attack can force me to move from this seat will be yours today. Yi Shiwen smiled coldly. His eyes were deep and emotionless. It was as if this matter couldn't even affect his emotions. Good. Straightforward. Everyone can bear witness to this. You can't deny it. I'm coming. The evil dragon immediately roared and soared into the sky. In an instant, a huge vicious dragon appeared in front of everyone. It expanded with the wind and instantly grew to a length of over 1,000 miles. It pulled out its body that was hidden in the layers of the void. Although it spoke arrogantly, it didn't underestimate Yi Shiwen. Obviously, it regarded Yi Shiwen as a formidable opponent. In its eyes, it was nothing. Perhaps it might not be able to suppress Yi Shiwen, but it was not difficult to force him to move away from his seat. Roar! This evil dragon roared towards the sky. There was a bit of the bloodline of the dragon race in his body. It was unknown where he cultivated and obtained the Tao, allowing him to cultivate to the level of a god king. It was simply unimaginable. Even among the pure-blooded dragons, there were very few who could cultivate to the divine king level. It was as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns. However, this evil dragon with mixed blood could cultivate to this level. Boundless dragon power was released. The sky was filled with golden light. In the void, it was like the only sun in the world, covering all the light in the world. Dragons roared to the world. The evil dragon roared. Everyone saw countless principles being mobilized amidst the endless golden light. A long dragon was constructed at an astonishing speed. It roared and rushed towards Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen was stunned. Yi Shiwen's eyes lit up. His eyes were filled with killing intent. This evil dragon formed by the laws had dense scales. It was lifelike, as if the real Dragon King had been reborn. Although this evil dragon was arrogant, it was indeed capable. Many divine kings compared in their hearts. Even they might not be able to launch such an attack. However, these thoughts only flashed by. In just an instant, everyone saw the long dragon pounce in front of Yi Shiwen. Thumph! Yi Shiwen just snorted coldly. Rays of golden light appeared on his body. The long dragon directly collided with it. Boom! There was a loud sound. What surprised everyone was that when the two sides collided, there was not the slightest wave of energy sweeping out. The long dragon seemed to have entered a different space. Its whole body was submerged in Yi Shiwen's golden light. However, Those divine kings could clearly see that it was not submerged in the golden light. It was clearly being ground away bit by bit. Therefore, from afar, it looked like the long dragon had submerged in the golden light and submerged into Yi Shiwen's body. In fact, this was not the case at all. It's not over yet. 100 dragons contend for hegemony. The voice of that evil dragon resounded above Yi Shiwen's head. He saw that this evil dragon had faintly transformed into an ugly man. Then, he ferociously punched towards Yi Shiwen. The world shook with just one punch. The matrix arrays that had been arranged in advance in the hidden valley were shattered one after another. The fist light transformed into hundreds of long dragons in an instant and rushed towards Yi Shiwen with a whistling sound. It was majestic and mighty, just like a long river that was rushing towards the sea. Nothing could stop it, and everything that tried to stop it would be crushed into pieces. Yi Shiwen suddenly opened his eyes. From his body, a sword light soared into the sky and rushed towards the hundreds of long dragons. Boom! An astonishing collision sound was heard. Then, everyone saw an astonishing scene. Yi Shiwen's sword light cut through the sky as if it was cutting vegetables. It beheaded all these heavenly dragons as if they were chopping melons and vegetables. Chapter 28:10. Rumble. A series of explosions sounded, and the sword light easily annihilated these dragons. A series of annihilations slashed directly in front of Yi Shiwen to the front of the vicious dragon. This dragon immediately retreated, constantly blasting out ominous lights, sweeping towards the sword light, but it was useless. The sword light that Yi Shiwen slashed out swept across the sky, invincible. However, it still seized the opportunity and teleported away. Then, it directly saw Yi Shiwen's sword light slashing into the depths of the starry sky. It was unknown how many stars it swept through, but they were all annihilated in an instant. The terrifying fluctuations of the nomological laws made the divine king's hearts skip a beat. If they were hit on the spot, even the divine kings would die. Yi Shiwen's sword light was too terrifying. It had almost exceeded their limits. If they were to face it, they would definitely die. However, they also felt very strange in their hearts. Both sides' attacks were vicious, and it didn't seem like ordinary means at all, nor did it seem like a spar. Although it was said that any little mistake in a spar between experts could cause a fatal threat, this was after all not a life-and-death fight, and they weren't enemies at all. Although they felt strange in their hearts, they were still completely convinced by the magnificence of Yi Shiwen's sword just now. The sky full of multicolored lights turned into sword light and scattered in all directions. Just one sword strike was enough to kill a divine king. This Yi Shiwen's strength seemed to be much more terrifying than the rumors. If they still regarded him as an ordinary junior, then it was very likely that they would suffer a great loss in the future. Many people became vigilant. At this moment, they were a little glad that this vicious dragon made a move. Otherwise, how would they know that Yi Shiwen, who looked a little thin, was the real terrifying killer? The vicious dragon's attack actually couldn't even shake Yi Shiwen. From the beginning to the end, it was the magical power of the nomological laws that automatically condensed and counterattacked. As for Yi Shiwen, he sat upright on his seat, not moving at all. However, his eyes were staring at this vicious dragon, and there was a rare look of seriousness on his face. Dragon roar shakes the 9 heavens. This evil dragon soared into the sky. Its huge body was like an incomparably huge mountain that rose from the ground. Every part of its body was emitting waves of golden light. Then, it began to move rapidly, causing the entire universe to tremble. A series of dragon roars could be heard. Above the secret alliance, all the divine masters and divine kings started to feel a little dazed. This kind of terrifying power seemed to have surpassed that of an ordinary peak divine king. It had directly reached the level of the 10 great divine kings. On the other hand, the hidden king's expression was extremely ugly because he could clearly sense that the evil dragon's power had increased by several levels in a short period of time. It had directly charged to a position that was similar to his. What did this mean? It meant that this evil dragon was hiding its strength, yet he didn't react in the slightest. This in itself was a type of humiliation, an enormous humiliation. He had even created a huge hidden danger for today's meeting. He couldn't help but feel extremely depressed and regretful. Fortunately, he looked at Yi Shiwen and didn't seem to be shaken. This level of power shouldn't be a problem. It was just an ordinary expert of the 10 great divine kings level. He had even killed quasi-emperors before, so this was nothing. The evil dragon rushed down and set off a terrifying wave of air. In an instant, everyone retreated decisively. It felt as if an incomparably huge universe had directly collided with a great enemy from the universe. Even a top-notch expert wouldn't be able to withstand the full force of an expert of the 10 great divine kings level. However, in the void, the evil dragon's body was shaking rhythmically. Its entire body had integrated with the great Tao. This was an invincible attack. This was using its own body as the strongest weapon. It directly bombarded down, causing the heavens and the earth to collapse. Boundless dragon energy was emitted from its body. It was even purer than the ordinary pure-blooded dragon race. Die! That evil dragon roared continuously in the void. There were laws all over its body that turned into thousands of long dragons. They followed it, dazzling and dazzling. The light was incomparably blazing. Yi Shiwen smiled coldly. In the face of such an attack, he didn't even blink. Every pore on his body was spewing out powerful sword aura. It formed a word sword above his head. This word faintly turned into a supreme emperor holding a long sword. In an instant, it attacked. Walalala! A long river of swordsmanship descended from the sky and directly rushed up to that evil dragon. Bang! There was an incomparably huge roar. Incomparably powerful forces collided. Yi Shiwen's sword aura directly hit the body of this evil dragon. And this evil dragon actually opened its big mouth and directly swallowed Yi Shiwen's sword aura, swallowing it bit by bit. The people watching from afar felt completely suffocated. They almost had a feeling that they couldn't breathe. It was completely beyond their initial expectations. This Yi Shiwen's strength was even more tyrannical than they had imagined. And this evil dragon's frequent attacks even made them feel terrified. Walalala! The collision between the two parties formed a terrifying airwave that spread out in all directions. In an instant, it was unknown how many formations and boundaries that had been buried in the plaza were destroyed. The expressions of the many divine kings and divine masters outside the boundaries changed. If it really spread, then they would most likely be seriously injured by the aftermath of this wave. And at this moment, the hidden king directly stood up from his position. He spread his hands and endless light erupted from the gaps between his fingers. Immediately, the slightly dangerous formations and boundaries stabilized. As an expert of the 10 great divine kings level, he wasn't someone to be trifled with. He wasn't joking around. This kind of power was only enough to maintain the stability of the formations and boundaries. Seeing that the formations and boundaries had stabilized, everyone couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. They were finally a little safer. However, at this moment, the few divine kings that belonged to the Hidden Valley also attacked one after another. At the same time, they were also strengthening the boundaries. If Yi Shiwen attacked with his full strength, they couldn't guarantee that the entire continent wouldn't instantly fall apart. The power that belonged to the quasi-emperor level was not a domain that they could pry into. However, at this moment, the situation underwent a huge change. Yi Shiwen laughed coldly and said, "You want to swallow my sword light? You're really delusional." Everyone looked over and saw that the evil dragon had actually swallowed Yi Shiwen's sword light by 70 to 80%. Explode! Yi Shiwen didn't even move. He only shouted, and immediately, a series of explosive sounds came from within the evil dragon's body. Its body, which was even more tyrannical than the orthodox dragon race, exploded on the spot. It turned into a bloody mist that filled the sky and spread out in all directions on the spot. This is the outcome of the battle has been decided. Everyone swallowed a mouthful of saliva. At this moment, they felt that the suffocating feeling just now had disappeared. Yi Shiwen had dealt with the evil dragon with a single sword strike. Everyone looked at Yi Shiwen with even more reverence in their eyes. It was simply unimaginable. One must know that the power that the evil dragon finally erupted was comparable to the 10 great divine kings. It had hidden its strength to this extent, but Yi Shiwen was still able to easily break through it. What kind of level could Yi Shiwen's true strength reach? At this moment, many divine kings who had ulterior motives suddenly calmed down. In this hidden alliance, other than the hidden king, who had clearly stepped into the 10 great divine kings level, there was still Yi Shiwen who could easily kill the peak divine kings of the 10 great divine kings. No matter how they looked at it, they couldn't be considered weak. Although they still couldn't be compared with the peak emperor's inheritance, they had already formed a momentum. This evil dragon was really unlucky to actually provoke such an invincible expert. It had really kicked an iron plate. If it died, it would die in vain. No one would seek justice for it. Even if it didn't die, it would have to lose more than 1,000,000 years of cultivation to recover. However, just when everyone thought that the battle was over and Yi Shiwen had completely established his own prestige, they only heard Yi Shiwen say indifferently, "Why? Don't tell me you still want to hide in this evil dragon's body? Senior, you don't have to hide like this." When everyone heard Yi Shiwen's words, their hearts couldn't help but skip a beat. Could it be that there was still a hidden expert? Could it be that the evil dragon that was at the level of the 10 great god kings wasn't the ultimate expert? Many people thought of many possibilities at once. They were all divine masters and divine kings, and none of them were stupid. They immediately understood that someone had snuck in. The expressions of the hidden king and the others were even more unsightly. They had put up a tight defense, but someone had still managed to sneak in. Furthermore, the person had used the body of the evil dragon to enter. This was a resounding slap to the face of their security work. Ha ha! You deserve to be the most outstanding genius of the human race in recent years. You actually saw through me. A burst of wild laughter came from the depths of the sky. Then, everyone only saw that the fierce dragon that had been blasted into a bloody mist by Yi Shiwen's sword explosion actually reassembled itself in the void. Then, it slowly transformed into a human figure. This human figure looked like a young man dressed in a purple robe from afar. There was a single eye on his forehead. This was an innate magical power. It was the sign of the opening of the heavenly eye. It was also a kind of extraordinary, great magical power that could penetrate through the heaven and earth. Although the evil dragon hadn't transformed into a human figure before, everyone still reacted immediately. This should not be that evil dragon. It must be the intruder that Yi Shiwen had mentioned before. I'm not the most outstanding genius yet, Yi Shiwen said indifferently. He wasn't the slightest bit moved by the other party's compliments. Haha, if I say you can bear it, then you can bear it. The voice of the young man in the purple robe fell. He looked as if he couldn't be rejected at all. There aren't many people in the world who can bear my evaluation. Chapter 28:11. Everyone felt an unprecedented strong pressure from the purple-robed young man. This was a pressure of a different level of life. It was completely different from the pressure that Yi Shiwen had given them just now. This young man was actually a quasi-emperor. Everyone couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. This was the only way to explain why Yi Shiwen, who could even easily kill a master of the 10 great divine kings level, was actually a little afraid when facing this purple-robed young man. His expression was unprecedentedly dignified. It wasn't like the playful expression that he had when he killed the evil dragon previously. Previously, he knew that the evil dragon couldn't pose much threat to him. However, it was different now. Although the purple-robed young man in front of him was using the body of the evil dragon, he gave him a completely different feeling. This was a strong feeling that could really threaten him. He hadn't felt such a feeling for many years. Even the 100-eyed giant didn't give him such a threat. The identity of this purple-robed young man wasn't simple. "May I know your name, senior?" Yi Shiwen asked seriously. The other party was a matchless powerhouse who could produce such an amazing change even if he attached his spirit to the evil dragon's body. Even the sudden increase of the evil dragon's strength to the level of the 10 great divine kings should be caused by the purple-robed young man in front of him. I haven't mentioned my name for a long time. It doesn't matter if I tell you today. My name is Great Freedom Heaven." As soon as the purple-robed young man's voice fell, the entire square suddenly took a breath of cold air. Great Freedom Heaven? What? He is Great Freedom Heaven? It's impossible. Great Freedom Heaven? Is it the Great Freedom Heaven of the Heaven Clan? The current #1 master of the Heaven Clan, Great Freedom Heaven. Everyone reacted at once. Unlike Yi Shiwen, who had been in closed-door training for hundreds of years, they didn't know what had happened. They were very clear about how terrifying the Great Freedom Heaven was. In these 100 years, the experts of the Tian clan attacked everywhere, and the army of the Tian clan wreaked havoc everywhere. During this process, the names of countless experts of the Tian clan became widely known, and many of them were powerful figures who had created invincible reputations in the war against the heavens many years ago. The Great Carefree Heaven was one of them. Countless years ago, the Great Carefree Heaven was already famous for his tyrannical strength. He was one of the strongest experts below the Emperor of the Celestial race. It was even rumored that because of his outstanding performance on the battlefield, he had once angered the Emperor of the Celestial race's allied army to personally deal with him. In the end, the Emperor could only heavily injure him and not kill him in one fell swoop. Although he was rescued by other Celestial race Empyreans, the fact that he was able to escape from an Empyrean emperor was enough to prove his tyrannical strength. In the past, he had been sealed and exiled to the endless void by the Emperor of the Allied army, along with the other experts of the Celestial race and the majority of the people of the Tian clan. Now, with the destruction of the seal, he had also come out. Although he had just come out in the past few decades, he had already fought several earth-shattering battles. He had even killed his way into the Allied army's headquarters alone and was still able to escape unscathed. The Allied army's headquarters had used the array formation left by the Emperor of the Celestial race. Tens of thousands of array formations had been launched at the same time, but he was still able to escape unscathed. For a time, he had become famous and already had the title of the #1 person in the world. In this era where the Emperor didn't appear, he was almost invincible. Even according to the various news that had spread in the Tian clan, it was very likely that he was already at the peak of the quasi-emperor realm. He was only a little bit away from becoming an invincible emperor. It would be a huge disaster for the heavens and the 10,000 worlds if he really reached that point. For such a legendary person, even if everyone was already considered to be in the upper echelons of the Allied army, they were still in the realm of myths and legends. They could only look up to him. And now, such a person had personally come to their alliance meeting. Although it was only the incarnation of his spirit, and he was controlling an evil dragon, it was still enough to shock them. No one knew just how many more tricks the supreme beings who were close to attaining enlightenment had yet to use. It was not something they could speculate about. Even their life levels had begun to undergo a deeper level of transformation. They could feel it. Their strength was constantly increasing after they had confirmed their Tao. However, their essence was still just a name. The essence of their life hadn't changed much. However, they could feel a kind of transformation in the essence of life from the body of the Great Freedom Heavens. Once this transformation reached the extreme, he would reach the level of the legendary emperor. The Great Freedom Heavens? Yi Shiwen frowned slightly. At this time, the Hidden King had also transmitted all kinds of information about the Great Freedom Heavens to him. He now knew that such a heaven-defying character had appeared in the heavenly race during his closed-door training. This person could go in and out of the Allied army headquarters alone and escape unscathed. This was something that ordinary quasi-emperors couldn't even dream of. Ordinary quasi-emperors were powerful. However, they would be courting death if they dared to rush into the Allied army headquarters. It would be a piece of cake to destroy them by relying on the various means left behind by the Allied army headquarters. Therefore, the Great Freedom Heavens could only besiege the Allied army headquarters. They couldn't break through it. They had to divide their forces to plunder resources and destroy other sections. The Great Freedom Heavens was indeed qualified to be the strongest person in the world if he could do this. Of course, the premise was that the Emperor wasn't present. Yi Shiwen would have to find a way out if the other party had come in his true body. He didn't need to worry about his own safety since he had the time robe. However, it was only a wisp of his spirit now, so he didn't need to worry about anything. Yi Shiwen had sensed that the evil dragon wasn't normal from the very beginning. How could a normal person provoke him at this time? Moreover, the dragon hadn't retreated and admitted defeat after witnessing his strength. Instead, it had continued to provoke him to improve its strength. That would be stupid. Who could cultivate to this point? Who was a fool? Yi Shiwen had found something wrong with the evil dragon's body at that time. However, he had thought that an ordinary quasi-emperor had jumped in. He hadn't expected that the strongest person in the world would come. So, it's the senior who has come. I apologize for not going out to meet you. Yi Shiwen cupped his hands in obeisance and said, this was a show of respect to the strongest person in the world. Any other evil dragon wouldn't even have the qualifications to let Yi Shiwen look at it. Everyone held their breath and looked at the great freedom heavens. They didn't know why he had come this time. His true body had been sitting on the front line of besieging the Allied Army headquarters all year round. He wouldn't leave. Otherwise, the army of the heavenly race wouldn't have been able to withstand the joint attack of the Allied army. There were many experts in the Allied army, so they wouldn't be able to suppress the other party unless he personally brought up the rear. Now, he had sent his primordial spirit incarnation. This matter itself seemed very unusual. I came here on a whim. I heard that a peerless hero has appeared in your human race. He can be compared with the ancient sages. So, I came here to see if you can be compared with Fushi and the others. The great freedom heavens said indifferently, fortunately, you didn't disappoint me. You should be proud of your cultivation at such a young age. It's a pity that I didn't get to see the glory of the Emperor of Qin. I hate that we weren't born in the same generation. Senior, you must be joking. Would you still be alive to boast here if we were born in the same generation? Yi Shiwen sneered. The Emperor of Qin was invincible even when he was young. So, it wouldn't be a good thing if the great freedom heavens had been born in the same generation as him. In fact, he would have perished in the end. When the great freedom heavens heard this, he didn't seem to be moved at all. He just said indifferently, if we were born in the same generation, I would have killed him. Then, I could have used that battle to successfully achieve the Tao. His words were filled with boundless confidence. Instantly, many of the divine masters and divine kings present went into an uproar. This was because they were all humans just like Yi Shiwen. The North Star family in particular had indignant looks on their faces. The Emperor of Qin was the only one in the human race to become an emperor. He was also the only one in the modern era to achieve the Tao and become an emperor. Everyone in the world respected him. Even if there were people who hated him to the core, they wouldn't dare to say such arrogant words. Killing the Emperor of Qin when he was young was a joke. According to historical records, the Emperor of Qin was invincible ever since he made his debut. He won every battle he fought. Especially after he became a god, he never met anyone who could rival him. In the end, he defeated all the strong enemies and became an emperor. How could this great freedom heavens be so arrogant? Although he was recognized as the strongest person in the world now, the Emperor Qin had also dominated the world in the past. What right did he have to say such words? Beichen Yuan couldn't help but shout, "Great freedom heavens, don't talk big. If you were born in the same generation as the Emperor of Qin, you wouldn't even know how you died." Nonsense. Is there any room for you to speak here? Great freedom heaven smiled coldly and waved his sleeve. Instantly, boundless power turned into a rainbow that covered the sky and swept towards Beichen Yuan. Beichen King, who was next to him, didn't have time to help. He could only watch as great freedom heaven's shocking attack rushed towards him. Puff! A very soft sound was heard, and the all-encompassing attack vanished into nothingness. Only now did everyone realize that Yi Shiwen had forced out a sword energy from his finger at the most crucial moment. He then pointed it towards great freedom heaven's attack and turned it into nothingness. Then it disappeared from the world in an instant. Great freedom heavens, the emperor of the human race, isn't someone you can compare to. If you were really that powerful, you would have become an emperor long ago. Just tell me why you're here. Yi Shiwen stared at great freedom heavens and said calmly. There was a sharp look in his eyes. Chapter 28:12. Great Realm of Freedom. You can't compare with the emperor of the human race. You would have become an emperor long ago if you were that powerful. Just tell me why you've come. Yi Shiwen didn't feel anything even though he was facing the strongest expert in the world. Moreover, both sides were enemies. Moreover, the great realm of freedom was the strongest expert of the celestial race. Even if it was just a soul avatar, it could easily attract the attention of the high-level experts of the Allied forces. Great Realm of Freedom looked at Yi Shiwen and said, I've heard that a peerless expert of the human race has appeared. Now that I see it, it's true. I've just come out, and I don't have any followers yet. I'll give you a chance to become my follower. Follower? Ha 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 ha. You want me to become your follower? Yi Shiwen laughed out loud. It seemed as if he was about to burst into laughter. The celestial race is full of trash. What kind of a gift is this? Great Realm of Freedom didn't care. He just looked at Yi Shiwen indifferently. It seemed as if he was waiting for his answer. What if I don't live up to my reputation? Yi Shiwen asked again. Then just kill him. Anyway, the entire race will be wiped out. What's one more or one less? Great Realm of Freedom said indifferently. Arrogant. Many humans gritted their teeth and said this. This was related to the righteousness of the entire race. It was also related to themselves. How could they not be angry? Great Realm of Freedom, your celestial race has failed twice. You're no longer at your peak. Don't talk big before you achieve it. Otherwise, you'll slap your own face in the end. Yi Shiwen said indifferently. Great Realm of Freedom didn't care about this matter like the ordinary celestial race. Perhaps this matter was nothing in his eyes. He was the strongest person in the world. No longer at your peak? Perhaps. But you're far from being comparable to the two wars, aren't you? Great Realm of Freedom said indifferently. Yi Shiwen, give me a reply. His eyes were looking at the deep universe. However, Yi Shiwen could clearly feel that Great Realm of Freedom's soul had locked onto him. You want to kill me? Yi Shiwen reacted immediately. He immediately understood Great Realm of Freedom's intention. He didn't even try to hide. That's interesting. If you don't come here personally, I'd like to see what kind of ability you have to be so arrogant. Yi Shiwen moved as he thought of this. The devil wings on his back suddenly spread open. Then his figure suddenly streaked across the vast sky like a meteor and rushed towards the great freedom heaven. And if I say no? Yi Shiwen's voice reverberated in the air. Everyone was horrified. Yi Shiwen had actually attacked the world's #1 expert. Even if it was just a soul incarnation, it still had a huge deterrent effect on everyone. These god kings and god masters weren't even on the same level as him. Then die. Mahasvara's cold voice caused everyone's hearts to go numb. A battle was unavoidable. Mahasvara's eyes burst with countless symbols of the Great Path, and there were traces of the Great Path in them. The title of the #1 person in the world was indeed not false. Perhaps the rumor that he was about to achieve the Great Path was not false. In an instant, his body had already fallen into an endless space. It was a blur, making it impossible for anyone to see where exactly he was. Bang! Yi Shiwen's attack instantly arrived in front of the great freedom heaven. His strength had increased by more than just a little bit compared to before. Everyone realized that Yi Shiwen hadn't used his full strength when he had easily killed the 10 great God King level experts. In fact, he had only used a small part of his strength. When had he grown to this level? It was simply unbelievable. His attack had reached its peak at this moment. He was killing in all directions. He wanted to kill the great freedom heaven in one breath. There was a bit of anger in the eyes of the great freedom heaven. Yi Shiwen hadn't agreed, but he had actually dared to attack first. He didn't respect him at all. This was the first time he had encountered such a person. However, it was also because of this that his killing intent towards Yi Shiwen was even more boiling. He couldn't allow such a person to live if he didn't surrender. He had to kill him. An ancient character appeared on the body of the great freedom heaven. No one could see what it was, but it had fooled him. Yi Shiwen's attack had bombarded down and was easily blocked by the great freedom heaven. The great freedom heaven had the same body, but it couldn't be compared with the evil dragon's consciousness. There must be a big secret hidden in his body. That was why his strength had improved to this level. Is your full strength only at this level? The words of the great freedom heaven revealed a mocking tone. It seemed as if he was laughing at Yi Shiwen's overconfidence. Whether it's only at this level or not, you'll know once you give it a try. Boundless fist light splashed out from Yi Shiwen's 5 fingers and shot into the sky. It seemed like the first ray of light that had split the world apart. It shattered everything and allowed everything to be reborn and re-enter the cycle of reincarnation. This was the way of heaven and earth. The 6 paths of reincarnation fist is indeed powerful. However, it's far from reaching its peak in your hands. The principles appeared around the great freedom heaven's body. They spread out in all directions like water ripples. They directly blocked Yi Shiwen's attack and only left bursts of chaotic smoke. Yi Shiwen's expression also changed slightly. This was the first time he had encountered an invincible person who could block his 6 paths of reincarnation fist just by relying on the understanding of the principles around him. Even the head of the 100-eyed giant would have exploded if he hadn't blocked it. Others might not know how powerful Yi Shiwen's punch was. However, Yi Shiwen was well aware of it. The great freedom heaven's understanding of the principles had reached a shocking level. He could easily block the 6 paths of reincarnation fist with just a casual defense. Yi Shiwen, refusing my invitation was the last and worst decision you've ever made in your life. It's impossible for you to defeat me if your strength is second only to mine. The great freedom heaven said coldly, I'll make you understand that no one in this world can refuse me. Anyone who refuses me will die without a burial place. Humph. You want me to be your follower? You're not qualified. Yi Shiwen sneered. The great freedom heaven attacked at this time. The countless principles around his body started to boil. It seemed as if a real dragon was coiling around his body. It swept out in an instant, and an invisible power spread out. The terrifying power started to boil. Everyone in the distance was in a daze. They felt as if their bodies were going to collapse under the effect of the power of the principles. The great freedom heaven was known as the #1 expert in the world. It wasn't a lie. Everyone started to retreat decisively. They might have been able to sit down calmly when Yi Shiwen had fought against that evil dragon. But the battle between Yi Shiwen and freedom heaven had made them thoroughly understand one thing. The disparity between them and these 2 individuals was too great. They weren't on the same level of existence. They retreated again and again. They didn't dare to approach them. Just the aftermath of such a battle was enough to tear their bodies into pieces. Hiss, why do I feel as if a powerful emperor has been resurrected in the sky? What kind of terrifying power is this? Why does the heavenly race have such a formidable power? Is this the peak of the quasi-emperor? If the peak of the quasi-emperor is this powerful, then how terrifying would the real emperor be? How terrifying would the strength of the heavenly race be when they were at their peak? They could contend against many races in the world by themselves. Many divine kings and divine lords couldn't help but change their complexions when they saw this scene. They couldn't believe it. Fortunately, they still had Yi Shiwen. Otherwise, they would have died without a burial place. Yi Shiwen suddenly felt that the surrounding principles were getting out of his control. Originally, there was an absolute domain around his body. No one could control these principles within this absolute domain. It was also his absolute domain of safety. This was also the reason why the final battle had to be settled by martial arts. If one wanted to crush someone with the principles, then one's comprehension of the principles would have far surpassed the others. It was like a fight between 2 top-notch hackers. Their control over various programs would annihilate each other. It was much more direct than going to the front of the other party and chopping the other party to death. This situation wasn't absolute. If one party's comprehension and control of the principles far surpassed the other party, then the entire situation would be completely different. Just like the current Yi Shiwen. Although Yi Shiwen was far superior to ordinary people and was above all divine kings, and even ordinary quasi-emperors weren't his match, he was still a divine king in the end. He was just a divine king who had an extremely profound understanding of the principles. Even ordinary quasi-emperors didn't have such a profound understanding of the principles. It was also because of this that he could be said to be invincible against other quasi-emperors. However, the realm of freedom was different. He was Zhen Jiajing, someone who had already taken half a step into that realm. His comprehension of the principles was a level higher than Yi Shiwen's. He could actually use the principles to destroy the absolute domain around Yi Shiwen and directly attack Yi Shiwen's body. Yi Shiwen immediately felt the pressure. An incomparably heavy feeling came from his whole body. It seemed as if shackles had completely imprisoned his whole body. This was the effect of the neutral principle and the confinement principle. These two principles alone made Yi Shiwen feel as if he couldn't breathe. Do I have to use the robe of time now? Countless thoughts flashed through Yi Shiwen's mind. He naturally had his greatest trump card when he dared to attack. The robe of time could at least summon the sword of Avicii from the Demon King's treasury. It wouldn't be that easy to defeat him. Chapter 28:13. It would be a piece of cake for Yi Shiwen to destroy the spirit incarnation of Great Freedom Heavens with two Dao tools in hand. However, it was just a spirit incarnation. His main body's means were probably even more amazing. If Yi Shiwen had to use all his trump cards just to deal with the spirit incarnation of Great Freedom Heavens, then he wouldn't have any trump cards to use when facing him again. The only trump card that could be called a Dao tool was a Dao tool. Ordinary means wouldn't be of any use to him. Yi Shiwen immediately rejected this idea because it wasn't necessary. Great Freedom Heaven's cultivation of law was far superior to his own. He could suppress Yi Shiwen to this extent just by relying on the comprehension of law. This was indeed an unprecedentedly strong enemy. He wouldn't have dared to imagine such a terrifying situation in the past. However, it wasn't unsolvable. After all, it wasn't his main body. He was merely relying on the physical body of a peak divine king. It might not seem to be a problem at other times, but in reality, it was the biggest problem when facing Yi Shiwen. In terms of the comprehension of law, Yi Shiwen definitely couldn't compare with Great Freedom Heavens. However, the situation was completely different when it came to the body. More importantly, Yi Shiwen didn't care about the spirit incarnation of Great Freedom Heavens. Instead, he treated it as a kind of training and a whetstone. If he couldn't even deal with the spirit incarnation of Great Freedom Heavens, then how could he face his main body? Perhaps others were afraid of his main body. However, Yi Shiwen didn't think so. For him, Great Freedom Heavens was just a goal that he had to surpass. Perhaps it was the strongest goal in his life. However, how could he talk about achieving the Tao if he couldn't even match Great Freedom Heavens? Bang! Yi Shiwen's vital energy surged out of his body and broke the shackles of the principles. All the principles that tried to invade his body were smashed into pieces by his vital energy. Great Freedom Heaven's eyes flashed with a bit of surprise. He didn't expect that Yi Shiwen would get rid of his suppression so quickly and find a way to deal with it. Great Freedom Heaven's understanding of law was extremely profound. However, it was possible to fully display this understanding by relying on incomparable strength. His main body was naturally invincible. However, it didn't mean that this evil dragon could withstand such power. Moreover, it couldn't display such power. Therefore, to a certain extent, it seemed that he did not have much of an advantage. Mahasvara, I've read about you in the ancient records, and it seems like you're one of the strongest experts in the world. I'm curious as to how strong you have to be considered as one of the strongest experts beneath the god monarchs. I've never had a chance to do so in the past, but now I can take a good look at it. Yi Shiwen smiled coldly. He regained his composure and calmness. It seemed that the previous attack hadn't affected him at all. How would you juniors who were born in a peaceful era know how powerful we are? In the chaotic era of war, I even fought against a sovereign emperor. How would you understand? The great unrestrained heavens revealed the reason why he was so confident. In his opinion, no matter how shocking and brilliant these juniors were, they were nothing more than little flowers that had been raised in a greenhouse. They would be blown away by the wind. On the other hand, he had experienced a battle with a sovereign emperor. By the time of the Second War of Resistance against the heavens, he was already one of the few experts in the world. Being able to escape from a sovereign emperor was completely different from them. They were all little flowers that had been raised in a greenhouse. So, They weren't worth mentioning in the same breath. This kind of thing had always happened to Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen didn't have the system's inheritance. However, the number of times he had narrowly escaped death and the number of battles he had experienced was beyond their imagination. Yi Shiwen's strength had been tempered in iron and blood. He hadn't simply cultivated all the way to his current strength. Is that so? I don't think so. Yi Shiwen smiled coldly and said, so what if I was born early? It's not something to be proud of if I haven't achieved the Tao. You're just a junior. What do you know? You haven't reached this step yet. So, you don't understand that the gap between one step and the other is so great. The great, unrestrained heavens said indifferently. His expression seemed as if he was telling Yi Shiwen that Yi Shiwen wouldn't understand even if he explained it to him. To me, if you haven't crossed over, then you haven't. It doesn't matter how many excuses you find for yourself. The Qin Emperor's cultivation time wasn't even a tenth of yours, but he was still invincible. In the end, he achieved the Tao. This means that you don't have that kind of talent. Yi Shiwen said coldly, are you used to measuring others by age because you've been cultivating for a long time? This is the saddest thing about you. Growing older isn't an advantage. Instead, it's a burden. It will imprison your thoughts. It will make you grow old and rigid. In fact, it will make you unable to keep up with the times. The great, unrestrained heavens looked at Yi Shiwen coldly. He felt that he was looking at an opponent for the first time. Yi Shiwen's words didn't move his heart too much. After all, he already had his own standards in his heart, so he wouldn't be swayed by other people's words. However, Yi Shiwen was able to say such words even though he was looking down on him. This showed that Yi Shiwen's willpower wasn't ordinary. Yi Shiwen might grow to the same level as the great unrestrained heavens if Yi Shiwen was allowed to grow for a few more years. In fact, Yi Shiwen would become his matchless enemy. This was the first time that the great unrestrained heavens had a murderous intention after he had come out of the seal. He wanted to kill someone. He had to kill them. There was no other way. There were simply too many geniuses in this world. No one knew if a peerless genius would appear in a nameless race that no one knew about. Even their Tian clan was unable to control such a trend. It's useless even if you have a sharp tongue. It won't save you. The great unrestrained heavens finally moved at this time. His body moved slightly. Countless principles started to dance in a frenzy. However, they weren't without any pattern. They were actually responding to the principles of the Great Way. They were borrowing infinite power from the principles, and their might was overwhelming the world. The great unrestrained heavens wouldn't be able to defeat Yi Shiwen even if he were to rely on the strength of his spirit. So, he naturally had his own means and methods. At this time, the great unrestrained heavens was like a shrunken version of the Emperor. It might sound ridiculous. However, his true might made everyone suffocate. He was terrifyingly powerful. It seemed as if the real Emperor had come back to life in an instant. The world's principles could feel the anger of the great unrestrained heavens. There weren't many people who could make him angry since he had reached the pinnacle. The entire continent was shaking violently. It was trembling under his aura. The will of the continent was shivering. Everyone looked at this scene from afar and felt incomparably terrified. Boom! The great unrestrained heavens made his move. He suddenly grabbed with his big hand. Countless principles automatically attached to it and formed a huge hand that was thousands of feet in size. It sealed all the space in the world. No one could escape. It weaved into a huge net and sealed everything. Die! The entire body of the great unrestrained heavens erupted with bursts of dazzling golden light. He spouted out a mouthful of essence energy. The huge hand became even more terrifying after receiving this mouthful of essence energy. The rays of light became even more dazzling. Yi Shiwen's entire body was under great pressure. All the bones in his body were colliding, and the sound of metal colliding could be heard. He was also resisting. Law talismans appeared around him one after another and gushed out from his body. It was like an incomparably ancient scripture. It was like an incomparably huge divine kingdom, and it enveloped him within it. This was a confrontation of the laws. The big hand wanted to slap down, and Yi Shiwen wanted to push it back. Yi Shiwen clenched his teeth. He didn't launch a further surprise attack. He was simply enduring the pressure of the principles. I can't retreat. The principles of both sides were colliding in an astonishing manner. The principles that Yi Shiwen had condensed weren't superior to the great, unrestrained heavens. In fact, they almost collapsed upon contact. This showed the disparity in the comprehension of the principles of both sides. They weren't on the same level. However, some details were undergoing astonishing changes. The dazzling collision was still going on. Violent shockwaves spread out in all directions. Yi Shiwen's shattered principles condensed once again. This kind of direct collision of principles was the easiest way to destroy a person's faith. No matter how much faith one had, or how firm one's faith was, one's faith would collapse in an instant when one saw that the principles one had comprehended could not withstand a single blow from the opponent. However, Yi Shiwen didn't collapse. His willpower was already as firm as a rock. Moreover, the mysterious space was constantly deducing for him. He could absorb more of the principles every time he was defeated. It didn't matter whether it was from the defeat or from the great, unrestrained heavens. This was like tearing and reforming. Yi Shiwen's worldview was subverted every moment. It turned out that the application of the principles could be so ingenious. It turned out that this was the true way to use the principles. This kind of understanding of the race against time in a life-and-death situation made Yi Shiwen's mind tense to the extreme. He didn't even dare to take a breather. However, Yi Shiwen was also undergoing a kind of quiet transformation while he was constantly being defeated and reforming. His cultivation had stagnated after he had just broken through to the peak of the king-ranked realm. However, his cultivation had suddenly skyrocketed. This meant that his collisions with the principles of the great, unrestrained heavens were deepening. He was constantly absorbing the principles of the great, unrestrained heavens for many years. At the same time, he was strengthening himself and improving his ability to comprehend the principles. An ordinary person wouldn't be able to do this. If they collapsed in an instant, they would die. If their confidence collapsed, there wouldn't be any other outcome. However, Yi Shiwen had the mysterious space. Chapter 28:14. This was a possibility for Yi Shiwen to analyze his opponents and improve himself during the battle. If it was someone else, it would be impossible, but he could do it. This kind of thing could be said to be a walk in the park for him. It wasn't the first time he had done this kind of thing in his daily life. However, this was the first time he had analyzed such a powerful opponent. He had never felt this way before. He did not dare to relax, even a little. This was an excellent opportunity for him. There were so many laws in the sky that it was impossible for Yi Shiwen to understand all of them. Moreover, the application of all the laws was different. It would take a lot of time to comprehend them one by one. Now that he was analyzing Great Freedom Heaven's fighting style, it was like the key points in the textbook given to him by the teacher before the college entrance examination. This was the way to fight and the direction to comprehend. For Yi Shiwen, this would save him a lot of time and energy. Therefore, he would never let go of such an opportunity. All of this happened in just a few breaths. Great Freedom Heaven was a little surprised to find that his law attack did not manage to defeat Yi Shiwen in the first place. In the past, this would have been absolutely impossible, let alone a God King. Very few people would be able to withstand his attacks of laws, even if he were to face a quasi-emperor. Even if it was not his true body, this was definitely extraordinary. He even keenly found that Yi Shiwen's law attack contained some traces of his own attack. A terrifying thought flashed through his mind in an instant. Is he copying my method? He was shocked when he thought of this. His attack method had been copied by someone else. Moreover, it was by a small divine king. This was an incredible thing for him. This aroused his killing intent. Yi Shiwen was able to comprehend while fighting in such a battle. What a terrifying talent. He must not let Yi Shiwen continue to grow. Great Freedom Heaven would never have thought that Yi Shiwen was not copying his attack method. Instead, he was analyzing his attack method and finally transforming it into his own attack method. It seemed like the result was the same, but the process was completely different. A simple copy was knowing what it was, but not knowing why. But after analyzing it, using the same method to counterattack meant that one had already understood the principles behind it. This was even more terrifying, as one could draw inferences about other cases from one case. The speed at which one's cultivation was improving was simply too fast. As time passed, Yi Shiwen's law counterattack became sharper and sharper. He was able to hold his ground. It was not like the beginning when he was defeated. This showed that Yi Shiwen's understanding of the Great Way had increased by a whole level. In a short period of time, he had truly touched the peak of the 10 great divine kings. As long as he had enough Emperor Source, his martial strength could even reach the peak in a short period of time. He could even start to prepare to break through the quasi-emperor realm. This process would have taken him several hundred years if he didn't have the pressure of the great freedom heaven. But now, he had completed it in just a few breaths' time. This was the amazing effect of the mysterious space. Even Yi Shiwen was startled by it. Of course, the price of all this was that the Emperor's source that he had stored was getting smaller and smaller. It was being consumed at an alarming speed. However, Yi Shiwen was not worried. He had the key to the Devil King's treasure house. He could enter the Devil King's treasure house at any time. His Emperor's source could also be replenished. On the contrary, this was a rare opportunity. He was not willing to give up. This was an excellent opportunity. If it were any other expert at the peak of the quasi-emperor realm, they would be able to display a lot of methods when their deities had descended. They wouldn't need to use the pure law to crush Yi Shiwen. Then, Yi Shiwen wouldn't be able to absorb and comprehend like he was doing now. He even had an even crazier idea. If he could thoroughly understand the law displayed by Great Freedom Heaven, his cultivation would be able to go further in a short period of time. He would reach an unprecedented realm. Every step here could save him countless years of bitter cultivation. One must know that the current situation was getting more and more urgent. He couldn't afford to relax. He had only been in closed-door training for a mere 100 years. Unexpectedly, an invincible character like Great Freedom Heaven had appeared. This made him nervous. Everyone couldn't understand such a battle. They didn't know how intense the confrontation was. However, they understood that such a battle could endanger their lives if they weren't careful. So, they couldn't afford to give in. The shock waves of the collision between the two sides swept out. The internal formations of the hidden valley were recovering one after another. They were trying their best to resist the shock waves. However, even so, they were still broken from time to time. This terrifying situation made everyone terrified. This was a battle between quasi-emperor level experts. Even the entire hidden valley, which had already experienced the surprise attack of a quasi-emperor, was still terrified in the face of this force. Because at that time, Yi Shiwen had blocked the 100-eyed giant outside. Most importantly, the strength of both sides paled in comparison to the current strength of both sides. Meanwhile, Yi Shiwen was still constantly absorbing the comprehension of Great Freedom Heaven. He was still accelerating his cultivation. He was about to break through to the late stage of quasi-emperor level. The closer he got to that level, the easier it would be for him to fight against Great Freedom Heaven. Although the power of Great Freedom Heaven couldn't be compared to his main body, there was no difference in the comprehension of the law displayed by him. It was nothing more than being restricted by his strength, so he couldn't display it completely. After a long time, Great Freedom Heaven finally realized this. Even if it was only for a short period of time, it was enough for him to judge the situation. It might have been possible in the beginning. However, it was impossible for him to defeat Yi Shiwen by relying on the comprehension of the law. So, he finally moved. This time, he didn't use the law as the main force. Instead, he used his body, which had been stimulated to the peak. The terrifying roar of the evil dragon came from inside his body. It was screaming miserably because Great Freedom Heaven was burning his life essence. He didn't care about his existence at all. Anyway, it wasn't his own body. It was just a useless thing that could be thrown away after being used once. However, the evil dragon could feel that his strength was becoming stronger. He had directly broken through the boundary of the king realm and rushed into the quasi-emperor realm. He might have been very happy to make a breakthrough in normal times. However, he was being guided by someone. It wasn't his own will at all. Moreover, it would leave a very shocking future trouble. If the battle went on like this for too long, his body would explode on the spot. Even his soul would be blown to pieces. and he would not even have the chance to revive. He was scared and trembling. However, Great Freedom Heaven didn't care. He wouldn't have the strength to fight against Yi Shiwen if he didn't do this. The body of this human divine king was too amazing. It was unprecedented. He had seen human emperors before. However, he had never seen a divine king who was so tyrannical. He must have some kind of supreme bloodline and physique. Soon, the roar of the evil dragon disappeared. His consciousness had been crushed by the great freedom sky. He wanted to take complete control of this body. He couldn't let the original owner of this body exist. As long as the original owner of this body existed, he wouldn't be able to take complete control of this body. He didn't care whether this body would collapse on the spot or not. After all, it was just a one-time use item. Boom! Great Freedom Heaven finally made his move. His body was majestic and majestic. He was like a huge monument. He pressed down on Yi Shiwen on the spot. This was the supreme technique that he had displayed. The big hand suddenly received the infusion of his own power, and its power instantly increased by several levels. Yi Shiwen, who was only resisting with the power of the law, almost collapsed on the spot. Whoosh! Yi Shiwen's figure disappeared instantly, and the big hand slammed down directly, smashing a huge hole in the void directly. Countless chaos poured down in torrents. This attack made everyone feel as if they had seen the true resurrection of the legendary emperor. With a raise of his hand, countless galaxies were annihilated. What kind of strength was this? What kind of horror was this? This was a fight between quasi-emperors. Yi Shiwen appeared in the distance the next moment. There was a look of pity on his face. The collapse of the law couldn't affect his confidence. It couldn't destroy his martial arts either. It was a pity. He was so close to breaking through to the late stage of quasi-emperor realm. At that time, it would have been a piece of cake for him to improve his cultivation. It was a pity that he had failed at the crucial moment. However, he immediately restrained this feeling. What he had gained earlier had saved him hundreds of years of hard work. Wasn't that enough? You're quite capable to copy my attack. You're worthy of being the most outstanding genius of the human race. However, it's useless. Today is the day you die. Great Freedom Heaven's voice was cold and ruthless. A sinister look finally appeared on his face. He was finally angry because he couldn't do anything to Yi Shiwen. A big hand swept over without any warning and went straight towards Yi Shiwen to grab him. This speed was so fast that it seemed as if it had teleported. Crash! The big hand swept over Yi Shiwen's body. He turned into a ball of light on the spot and flew towards the depths of the universe. This is not the place to fight. Come with me if you're capable. Chapter 28:15. Humph! Great Freedom Sky didn't care. He immediately rushed out. In his opinion, the people of the Hidden Valley weren't a threat at all. As long as he could get rid of Yi Shiwen, everything would be as easy as pie. Although it was only a part of his spirit avatar that had descended, it was impossible for him to do such a thing frequently. Only a little bit of his spirit avatar was not Yi Shiwen's opponent at all. It would be wiped out by Yi Shiwen in minutes. Even if he had this body, he still wouldn't be a match for Yi Shiwen. He was very clear about this. Yi Shiwen flew into the depths of the cosmic void. Great Freedom Sky quickly followed him. Both sides confronted each other in the universe. His majestic figure stood in the sky like a real emperor looking down on all the ancient heavens. Yi Shiwen looked at the Great Freedom Heaven and slightly sighed. He had been unceasingly analyzing the Great Freedom Heaven's comprehension of the principles a while ago, and he had taken advantage of it. However, the Great Freedom Heaven had reacted now. However, it didn't matter. These understandings were enough for him to digest for a while. He would advance further after this battle. Buzz! Great Freedom Sky's imposing aura poured out like a waterfall. It swept towards Yi Shiwen in an overwhelming manner. Yi Shiwen didn't show any weakness this time. Since he couldn't take any advantage, he wouldn't show any weakness. His imposing aura poured out like a surging sea and collided with Great Freedom Sky. Boom! Great Freedom Sky moved like a violent star. He collided and destroyed the universe. Yi Shiwen didn't want to show any weakness either. He rushed forward on the spot. Bang! The terrible battle had just begun. Great Freedom Sky's offensive was very smooth. It swept across the battlefield. It was unknown how many strong enemies he could crush. Yi Shiwen was the opposite. He didn't hesitate at all. Each of his moves was aimed at Great Freedom Sky's vital points. Both sides exchanged thousands of moves in an instant. It was hard to tell who had the upper hand. Humph, admit defeat. You have no chance of winning against me. I'd like to see how long your vitality can last. Yi Shiwen sneered. He knew that Great Freedom Sky had no chance of winning since he relied on burning his vitality to enhance his strength. It's enough to kill you. Freedom Heaven looked at Yi Shiwen with an incomparably cold expression. His eyes were like the depths of the universe, without the slightest bit of warmth. Bang! 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 Yi Shiwen's berserk strength had completely broken out after he had completely let go of his hands and feet. Everyone had thought that the Great Freedom Heavens had gained the upper hand. However, it had been forced to retreat under Yi Shiwen's offensive. Although his comprehension of the laws was completely above Yi Shiwen's, it wasn't his main body after all. When Yi Shiwen decided to abandon the competition of laws and go all out, his advantage became extremely ridiculous. Yi Shiwen was not an ordinary God King. His methods were nothing in front of Yi Shiwen. Die! Yi Shiwen took a step forward and chased after the Freedom Sky after he had sent it flying. He then blasted a punch, and a fist light suddenly traversed the vast sky. It pierced through the sun and the moon and shattered countless stars. Behind him, the 6 paths of reincarnation wheel was constantly rotating, and the formidable power of the 6 paths of reincarnation wheel was constantly sweeping out. The fist light interweaved into a big net and wrapped everything together. The Freedom Sky couldn't escape. Bang! Freedom Sky couldn't help but groan as he was hit by Yi Shiwen's attack. He spouted a mouthful of blood, and his dragon energy was dense. 6 paths of reincarnation fist. Freedom Sky said coldly. He wasn't a benevolent person. He was an invincible person who had experienced the war against the heavens. He might have been exiled in the end, but that wasn't something that he could decide. That's right. It's the 6 paths of reincarnation fist. Let me use this fist technique to send you into reincarnation. Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. The principles surrounding the Great Freedom Heaven were forced away by his fist light. This martial technique is good, but it's still not a reason for you to be so arrogant. A gap appeared around Freedom Sky's body. An incomparably terrifying power wreaked havoc around him, and his clothes fluttered in the wind. At the same time, his body exuded an incomparably terrifying fluctuation. The eye on his forehead suddenly opened. However, it was not an eyeball, but a talisman. Freedom Talisman. Yi Shiwen recognized the origin of this talisman. It was very simple. This was one of the techniques that had made Freedom Sky famous in the past. The Great Unrestrained Talisman was a powerful essence of the martial path that the Great Unrestrained Heaven had obtained from somewhere. He had extracted it from that essence and refined it into the Great Unrestrained Talisman. It was a talisman that was invincible and had shaken the heavens in the past. And now, in the short span of a few decades since his return, he had made this technique famous once again, causing many people to recall this powerful technique from the depths of their memories. His imposing aura had increased by a notch under the support of the Freedom Talisman. He was determined to kill Yi Shiwen. So, you used the Freedom Talisman. I was wondering how a small spirit incarnation could have such amazing fighting power. Yi Shiwen narrowed his eyes and said. He had always wondered how a mere incarnation of Great Freedom's soul could wield the body of the evil dragon to such an extent. If a mere incarnation of Great Freedom's soul was so powerful, then he alone would be able to flatten the entire headquarters of the Allied army. Obviously, it was impossible for him to do so. Yi Shiwen, you forced me to use the Freedom Talisman. You're very powerful, but it ends here. Today will be the day of your death. Freedom Sky said coldly. Everyone couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. They were very clear about the prestige of the Freedom Talisman. Even the supreme existence of the Allied forces headquarters had suffered a great loss because of it. This technique was almost invincible. Freedom Sky's incarnation was enough to put Yi Shiwen to death even if he hadn't arrived. It's the legendary freedom talisman that even the Emperor cares about. I didn't expect that he would use such a technique to deal with Yi Shiwen. No one can stop this freedom talisman once it's used. The freedom talisman erupted with astonishing rays of light. It absorbed the essence of the world and projected it onto Freedom Sky's body. He was the sole overlord of the world at this moment. The power of Freedom Sky's body also skyrocketed. He didn't look like a sage at all. Whoosh! Freedom Sky attacked in an instant. His hands tore the blue dome of heaven. A dreadful power spread out, and it seemed as if it would tear Yi Shiwen's body into two halves. The great boundless talisman can transform into my strength. The great boundless talisman must contain countless comprehensions of yours. So, it can make me rise to the same level as you in one go. Yi Shiwen's eyes burst out with a bright light. He could stand shoulder to shoulder with Freedom Sky in terms of realm level if he could completely swallow and refine the Freedom Talisman. After all, Freedom Sky had comprehended all the principles of Freedom Sky's body. So, it naturally had such an effect. It was impossible to achieve this under normal circumstances. Yi Shiwen couldn't succeed with Freedom Sky's incarnation present. So, this was the best opportunity. Emperor Source come? Yi Shiwen shouted loudly. A huge portal appeared behind him. An endless demon energy rushed out of it. Countless Emperor Source poured into Yi Shiwen's body under his command and replenished his consumption. He had opened the door of the Devil King's treasure house to replenish his consumption. He wasn't willing to wait any longer. He was determined to obtain the Freedom Talisman. At this time, Great Freedom Heavens also saw countless Emperor Source pouring into Yi Shiwen's body. Even with his strength, he didn't have so many Emperor Source. Only a genuine Emperor could have so many Emperor Source. Otherwise, who could have so many Emperor Source? Of course, the inheritances of those Emperors were an exception. However, their Emperor Source had to be distributed to countless people. Moreover, they had to keep it. They couldn't use it all in one go. Moreover, they couldn't use it all at once like Yi Shiwen did. Only Yi Shiwen would behave in such a prodigal manner. So many Emperor Source. It's really great. My strength can increase by more than a little as long as I have these Emperor Source. Freedom Sky's eyes lit up. He had already reached the peak, and his strength couldn't increase by a large margin anymore. However, he could use many methods with so many Emperor Source. Therefore, he could increase his strength in a disguised way. You want to obtain my Emperor Source? You're delusional. Yi Shiwen sneered. Both sides had designs on each other's things. Therefore, they were even more determined to kill each other. Bang! Freedom Sky's attack fiercely blasted down. However, a mass of time power erupted from Yi Shiwen's body at the same time. 7 colored streamers covered his whole body and went up against Freedom Sky's attack. An astonishing collision broke out in an instant. The power of Freedom Sky's attack had increased by several times after using the Freedom Talisman. However, it was still easily blocked by Yi Shiwen. How is this possible? Freedom Sky's face revealed a somewhat incredulous expression. He knew very well how powerful his Freedom Talisman was. However, it didn't have any effect after using it. This made him frown. This is the time robe. Chapter 28:16. At this moment, he suddenly remembered. As a participant of the previous war, he was no stranger to the time robe. In the past, the Time King had single-handedly defeated the entire celestial race and sent them into a state of chaos. Although he wasn't one of the main forces in the battle that caused the fall of the Time King, he had also participated in the battle on the periphery. That battle had left a deep impression on him. Even now, he still couldn't forget it. That earth-shattering battle had shocked even him, who was one of the most powerful beings below the Imperial Monarch. After countless years, he had also improved from being one of the strongest experts below the Emperor King. He could almost be called the #1 expert in the world. However, whenever he thought of that battle, he would still tremble in fear. However, he immediately remembered that although it was the Time Robe, it was still in the hands of the Time King. It was certainly invincible in the hands of the Time King. However, in the hands of Yi Shiwen, a divine king, it was not necessarily the case. Now, he had the opportunity to seize the time robe. At that time, as long as he had the time robe, he would be able to comprehend the Great Way. Not to mention becoming the #1 expert in the world, it was not impossible for him to achieve the Emperor King's way. Greed flashed in his eyes. At his level, ordinary god artifacts would not even be able to make him open his eyes. However, the time robe definitely had the right to make him look sideways. In fact, he could even stare blankly at it. After obtaining the time robe, he would naturally be the #1 expert in the world. As an invincible expert, he actually did not have a Tao artifact in his possession. This in itself was a hidden danger. When he fought against experts on the same level as him, this could very well become a hidden danger. Not to mention the fact that Yi Shiwen had so many Emperor origins in his hands. This was something that he coveted even more. However, he couldn't figure out why Yi Shiwen had so many Emperor origins in his hands. This was simply inconceivable. After all, even he didn't have so many Emperor origins in his hands. The Great Freedom Talisman on Freedom Heaven's body suddenly lit up, and the sky trembled. It seemed that under this terrifying pressure, there was no way to resist. This was true terror and power. In the depths of the world, the sound of the laws of the universe shattering rang out. Everyone was terrified, but they still didn't dare to approach. They were trembling. The #1 under the heavens. Even if it wasn't his true body that personally descended, he was still far more powerful than they could imagine. After a short period of absent-mindedness, everyone's attention quickly returned. The battle between Yi Shiwen and Freedom Heaven was still going on. In fact, it was still going on crazily. Yi Shiwen had the protection of the time magic robe, and the flowing lights on his body had become even more intense. In fact, they had become even more unscrupulous. More and more powerful rays of light wreaked havoc on his body. Bang! 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 Freedom Heaven was trying to widen the gap between him and Yi Shiwen so that he could pierce through Yi Shiwen with his own laws. However, Yi Shiwen was the complete opposite. His gilded tyrant body had already reached the grand accomplishment level. His vitality was the most powerful aspect of his body. His body was simply invincible. His fist could pierce through the entire universe. It was as if an emperor had come to this world. His entire body was shining, and Freedom Heaven's attacks would fall on his body. But they would be absorbed by the time magic robe. Therefore, he didn't widen the gap between him and Freedom Heaven. Instead, he launched a melee in front of him. His agility technique had reached an unimaginable level with the help of the devil wings. It seemed to everyone that Freedom Heaven was constantly retreating. He was trying to widen the gap between him and Yi Shiwen. However, Yi Shiwen didn't give him such an opportunity. Instead, he was fighting in close combat. He had displayed his martial arts to the peak. He was using his powerful vitality to resist the imprisonment of the Big Fool's Law. Yi Shiwen's imposing aura was rising with each passing second with the help of the time magic robe, which was supported by the Emperor's source. The blue dome of heaven was trembling, and endless auspicious signs were spurting out. However, these auspicious signs were unimaginably terrifying, and they pierced through the world. Freedom Heaven was supported by the Great Freedom Talisman. However, he couldn't withstand it. The Great Freedom Talisman wasn't a match for Yi Shiwen. Neither was it a match for the time magic robe. After all, the time magic robe was a supreme divine tool left behind by an extremely powerful emperor. Yi Shiwen wasn't a tool spirit, so he couldn't display its full power. However, it was enough to subdue the enemy. Bang! Freedom Heaven took a direct hit from Yi Shiwen, and blood spurted out of the corner of his mouth. He had suffered a huge loss in the physical confrontation with Yi Shiwen. Yi Shiwen had used the time magic robe as a protection, and he had smashed the defense cast by the Great Freedom Talisman. Countless runes had emerged on the surface of the Freedom Talisman. Yi Shiwen, don't be too arrogant. You'll die today if you force my real body to come here. Freedom Heaven kept retreating as he roared again and again. He had never fought such a stifling battle. It had made him feel suffocated. He wouldn't have believed that someone could force him to this extent if he hadn't come here. And this was because he lacked a Tao tool. And this was the fundamental reason why he had been suppressed today. Therefore, he had become even more obsessed with Tao tools. After all, he wouldn't be suppressed like this again if he had a Tao tool. It was unforgivable even if it was only his doppelganger that was being suppressed by someone else. Force you? A sneer flashed across the corner of Yi Shiwen's mouth. I'm not forcing you. I want to kill you. You want your real body to come here? Ha ha ha. I want to see how you'll come here. A trace of panic flashed in Freedom Heaven's eyes. Indeed, Yi Shiwen had guessed it. It was impossible for his real body to come here so easily. Otherwise, he would have come here with his real body instead of just a doppelganger. After all, relatively speaking, Yi Shiwen was only a little bit of a problem, and the Allied Forces headquarters was the real problem. In these past 100 years, if it could be said that they had caught the Allied forces of the various races off guard, then now, the old fellows of the various races that were hiding in the myriad heavens realm had already appeared. If he dared to leave the Allied forces of the various races and come to kill Yi Shiwen, the entire Tian clan Allied forces would die under the siege of those old fellows. This was not a joke. The celestial race could contend against the various races in the heavens, but it didn't mean that the Alliance had no power to fight back. Although he was the strongest person in the world, he was not an emperor. It was impossible for him to be invincible. There were still some old fellows in the Alliance that made him feel very afraid. How could he not know? This was exactly what Yi Shiwen had expected. It was impossible for his real body to come here so easily, unless he planned to sacrifice those of the same race for Yi Shiwen alone. That was simply impossible. You were so insolent. Sooner or later, you will pay the price. Freedom Heaven roared. Today, he had been pushed to an unprecedented point by Yi Shiwen. The anger in his heart kept bursting out. Pay the price? There is no such person in the world. Yi Shiwen blasted out a punch, and the 6 paths of reincarnation wheel rotated. It was contaminated with the power of time, and it burst out with a terrifying brilliance. There were even solid crystals boiling in it. That was the solid form of time, and it could injure people in an instant. Freedom Heaven roared again and again, and the great Freedom Talisman burst out with an unimaginable light. However, it was still defeated by Yi Shiwen's punch. Their spiritual power was simply not on the same level. Even if he could mobilize the power of heaven and earth to help, he couldn't make up for the gap. At this moment, he realized that he had miscalculated this time. Poochie! The power of 6 paths of reincarnation hit his chest, and it raged on his chest, directly blasting him away. Yi Shiwen's expression was indifferent, but he didn't show any mercy. He rushed out and grabbed the sword intention in his hand. Then, he slashed down from the sky and was about to behead Freedom Heaven. He was burning the Emperor's source every minute and every second. Even Yi Shiwen, who was used to being extravagant, felt distressed at this rate. He could save a lot of things if he ended the battle a second earlier. Bang! The sword intention fell again, and directly blasted on Freedom Heaven's body. It instantly broke his defense and made him scream in pain. He felt as if his body would explode on the spot. The great Freedom Talisman burst out with light and stabilized his body. So, he didn't explode on the spot. At this moment, his movements had weakened due to his injuries. He couldn't keep up with Yi Shiwen's speed, even if he used a secret technique. The gap between them was getting bigger and bigger. Yi Shiwen had already arrived in front of him, and his hands were emitting endless golden light. He wanted to tear Freedom Heaven apart. His whole body was spurting blood. Yi Shiwen, I'll make you pay the price even if I die. Freedom Heaven roared, and a rare fanaticism appeared in his eyes. The power in his body instantly boiled, and he wanted to self-destruct. He was just a doppelganger. Although this would cause him to suffer a lot of losses, he was not afraid. Anyway, it was just a doppelganger. It would be best if he could kill Yi Shiwen. He had to pay a price to kill Yi Shiwen. For him, he would lose some face. However, even if he lost face, it was better than letting Yi Shiwen grow and become a thorn in his side. You want to self-destruct? You're thinking too much. Yi Shiwen roared. His entire body was flowing with 7 colored lights. His entire body looked like a glazed statue. His big hand suddenly stretched out and grabbed Great Freedom Heaven's body. The terrifying power of time displayed its terrifying power. Time had unexpectedly reversed. The power of his big explosion was forced back into his body bit by bit. He suddenly spouted a mouthful of blood, and the power of the backlash instantly injured Freedom Heaven to the extreme. Chapter 28:17. He had unleashed all of his power to the extreme when he had self-detonated. But now, Yi Shiwen had used the power of time to force it back little by little. One could well imagine how serious the damage would be. Only a small part of the energy that had been unleashed had erupted in his body. But it was enough to seriously injure him. Puff! Great Freedom Heavens spouted a mouthful of blood and sprayed it all over the world. Dragon scales had appeared on his body. This was a sign that he had lost control of his body after sustaining such a serious injury. But it was useless even if he had realized this because he had been caught by Yi Shiwen. He wanted to struggle, but it was useless. Yi Shiwen's big hand was like an iron hoop that had bound him. He didn't have the strength to break free after sustaining such a serious injury. On the contrary, Yi Shiwen was getting stronger. It seemed as if he could sense the transformation every minute and every second. This was what scared him the most. Yi Shiwen sneered. He spread his big hand and directly grabbed Great Freedom Heaven's body. "You want the Great Freedom Talisman?" Great Freedom Heavens reacted immediately. He immediately understood what Yi Shiwen wanted. He couldn't help but become angry. In his opinion, this was treason. Yi Shiwen had dared to covet his Great Freedom Talisman. So what? Yi Shiwen sneered. His big hand directly penetrated Great Freedom Heaven's body. The Great Freedom Talisman was glowing in the depths of his body. Yi Shiwen grabbed it, and it continued to struggle. It seemed as if it wanted to escape. "It's useless." Yi Shiwen said seal, and sealed the Great Freedom Talisman. Bang! Yi Shiwen's big hand grabbed Great Freedom Heaven's body, and his spirit exploded. His flesh and blood filled the sky on the spot, and was absorbed by Yi Shiwen's time robe. Yi Shiwen held the Great Freedom Talisman in his other hand. It was constantly emitting golden rays of light. Yi Shiwen sneered slightly. His entire mind had penetrated into the Great Freedom Talisman. It seemed as if he had entered a state of enlightenment. At the same time, outside the Alliance headquarters, in the headquarters of the army of the Heavenly Clan, Great Freedom Heaven suddenly opened his eyes. His face, which had never changed since ancient times, showed a look of anger. How dare he? How dare he? Freedom Heaven flew into a rage. He had already sensed the tragic death of his doppelganger. It was truly a tragic death. He was still suffering humiliation even at the moment of his death. Moreover, Yi Shiwen had seized his Freedom Talisman. This was an extraordinary humiliation. He now had an impulse to fly out to find Yi Shiwen and execute him. However, he clearly felt that as soon as his aura broke out, several auras immediately soared into the sky from the Alliance headquarters, facing him from a distance. Obviously, he had been targeted by the Alliance headquarters. Although he had held back a few of the old monsters in the Allied Forces headquarters and did not dare to go out and exterminate the other Tian clan Allied forces, on the other hand, wasn't he also being held back by those old monsters? From this point of view, it was really hard to say which side suffered more. Just like now, he had suffered a great loss, but had no choice but to act himself. No, this kid is so powerful. If I let him go, he will inevitably become a big trouble for my clan. I must get rid of him as soon as possible. Otherwise, he will become a big trouble for me sooner or later. The killing intent in his heart became more intense. He had seen Yi Shiwen's performance. In such a short time, Yi Shiwen was able to replicate his method. This was simply unheard of. Coupled with the fact that Yi Shiwen had risen in such a short time, this was already an extremely dangerous sign in his opinion. Perhaps Yi Shiwen could really achieve a very profound level in the future. Men, summon the old ancestors here. He roared loudly. At this time, outside the battlefield, many experts of the Hidden Alliance were dumbfounded. They did not know what the mystery was, but they only saw that Yi Shiwen had easily defeated Freedom Heaven. Even if it was just a spirit incarnation, it was still an unimaginable existence for them. The reputation of the Great Freedom Heaven was too resounding. They had heard of it regardless of whether they were willing or not. This name alone was enough to make the allied forces of the various races lose their courage upon hearing it. However, such a person had been defeated by Yi Shiwen. Yes, it was a crushing defeat. It was not a narrow defeat. In fact, it meant that Yi Shiwen didn't even have the strength to fight back. At this time, even some people who had been disloyal to Yi Shiwen were gone. They had either been eliminated or hidden in the deepest part of the Hidden Alliance. They could only obey Yi Shiwen's orders as long as he was alive. It was impossible for them to turn the situation around. Otherwise, Yi Shiwen could have easily killed them with his strength. This was without a doubt. Many people were envious of Yi Shiwen. Why has such a person appeared in the Hidden Valley? Their Hidden Alliance will prosper for a long time under Yi Shiwen's leadership. In fact, it won't be impossible for them to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Emperor's inheritance someday. No one had ever achieved such a thing. However, wasn't Yi Shiwen already walking on this path? He had already fulfilled many of the necessary conditions. Perhaps he would also have the possibility of success in the future. Many people began to get a little excited as they thought of this. Normally, the inheritance of the imperial monarch was something that they could only hope for. But now, perhaps they might really be able to compare with the inheritance of the imperial monarch one day. Just this alone was sufficient to make many people submit to him. Not to mention that Yi Shiwen possessed such formidable strength. So, they had no choice but to submit to him. The battle was over at this time. However, no one dared to approach him. Firstly, the aftermath of the battle was still wreaking havoc. Secondly, it seemed that Yi Shiwen was still in the state of enlightenment. So, no one dared to disturb him at this time. They were also powerful experts. So, they naturally knew how important enlightenment was for an expert. So, they didn't dare to rashly approach and disturb him. Yi Shiwen finally opened his eyes after a long time. The great freedom talisman in his hand had turned into ashes with a bang. A look of pity flashed in his eyes. It's a pity that this great freedom talisman is a defective product. He had thoroughly absorbed this great freedom talisman. So, he naturally felt that this great freedom talisman wasn't the real great freedom talisman. In fact, it might be a defective product that the great freedom heavens had refined at the same time. Or it might have been an experimental product. The power of this great freedom heavens talisman was also enormous. In fact, it could even support the battle between the great freedom heavens and Yi Shiwen. However, a fake was still a fake. It couldn't be compared with the real thing. However, it still contained the great freedom heavens' understanding of the Great Way. It could be said that it was an eye-opener for Yi Shiwen. It turned out that the depths of the Great Way were like this. It turned out that it could be used in this way. Yi Shiwen's stagnant understanding of the Great Way had suddenly improved by leaps and bounds. It could even be said that his understanding of the Great Freedom Talisman would be comparable to that of the Great Freedom Heaven if he could comprehend it thoroughly. His cultivation would skyrocket by then. However, his harvest was big enough. Yi Shiwen felt that he had finally touched that realm. That realm was called the Quasi-Emperor Realm. It was the last realm before the Emperor Realm. He would become one of the strongest experts in the world once he successfully crossed it. His fighting strength would also become more powerful, and it would be upgraded to another level. However, he wasn't fully prepared yet. It would be a huge destruction to the entire Hidden Valley if he were to attract the Quasi-Emperor Tribulation. Yi Shiwen made up his mind. He would first go to the headquarters of the Allied forces to understand the current situation. Then, he would look for a secret place to cross the tribulation. He knew very well that it would be impossible for him not to attract the attention of the heavenly race after this battle. He didn't dare to cross the tribulation near the Hidden Valley. Otherwise, the aftermath of his tribulation would destroy the entire Hidden Valley. He wasn't an ordinary quasi-emperor. So, his tribulation would naturally be 10 times, or even 100 times stronger than that of an ordinary quasi-emperor. In addition, if the heavenly race sent people to stop him, there would be another huge battle. He needed to make arrangements and preparations in advance. He had to think of all aspects. Otherwise, if he only thought about this problem when he was crossing the tribulation, he might die. He also needed to invite helpers to cross the tribulation. There were still many things he needed to do. He wasn't alone now. No one would come to find trouble with him. Of course, the most ideal situation would be to enter the martial sect or the emperor's inheritance to cross the tribulation. He could also borrow the help of their formations and heritage. Of course, the probability of that was very low. No matter how good his relationship with the martial sect was, it was impossible for him to get the opportunity to enter and cross the tribulation. The destruction of the quasi-emperor tribulation was too great. It was only possible if it was one of their own. Yi Shiwen sighed slightly. Those who didn't come from the emperor's inheritance were indeed at a disadvantage in all aspects. For example, if he wanted to cross the tribulation now, he would have to consider a lot. If he was a martial sect disciple, he wouldn't have to consider these things at all. Naturally, the old antiques of the martial sect would support him and solve his problems. In many cases, a powerful force was indeed very useful. Yi Shiwen restrained his mind and forcibly suppressed his restless martial power. Then, he returned to the Hidden Valley and returned to his throne. The people of the Hidden Alliance returned one after another. They were no longer as arrogant and unruly as before. This battle had thoroughly made them understand how huge the gap between them and Yi Shiwen was. I've made a fool of myself. Someone actually planned to make a big fuss in our alliance meeting. Fortunately, the final problem has been solved, Yi Shiwen said lightly. He didn't regard this as a big problem. However, this made everyone feel that he was exceptionally enigmatic. He could easily defeat the great freedom heavens. This was something that they couldn't guess. Chapter 28:18. Yi Shiwen didn't overestimate the importance of Great Freedom Heaven. After all, he had already defeated her. It was useless to overestimate her. However, in the eyes of others, this was a symbol of his strength. Many kings were still digesting this shocking fact. Yi Shiwen had killed the incarnation of Great Freedom Heaven. Even if it was just an incarnation, no one had ever heard of such a thing. This in itself was a miracle. Yi Shiwen's momentum of rise was so fierce that even the divine kings and divine lords who were used to seeing storms trembled. His speed was too fast. However, at the same time, his confidence in the entire secret alliance had increased by quite a lot. This wasn't an alliance that had a fraction of the ordinary 10 great divine kings. Instead, it had the battle prowess of a quasi-emperor. To an alliance, this was extremely important. Without such a guarantee, how could they compete with the world? With this interference, the alliance meeting was not interrupted. Instead, it was completed with an even more amazing result. This time, even without Great Freedom Heaven, Yi Shiwen would still find a way to deal with the troublemakers. He naturally understood the principle of killing the chicken to warn the monkeys. He was waiting to see if anyone dared to come out. Now, with Great Freedom Heaven, the effect of killing the chicken to warn the monkeys had far exceeded the original expectations. Because it was no longer killing the chicken to warn the monkeys. It was killing the monkeys to scare the chickens. During the alliance meeting, everyone's scope of responsibility was divided and the organization's hierarchy was reestablished. The highest position was naturally Yi Shiwen, followed by the deputy alliance master In King. The remaining divine kings were all elders of the secret alliance. Apart from the elders of the secret alliance, the rest were divine lords. They were considered the main force and pillars of the entire secret alliance. After all, it was impossible to let the elders and the alliance master do everything. There was already a framework for this. They just needed to wait for Yi Shiwen, the alliance master, to make the final confirmation. After solving these problems, this alliance meeting was considered to have come to an end. Basically, most of the forces of the various sects of the alliance had been taken into the alliance headquarters. It was no longer a loose alliance like before. Instead, it was a tighter alliance. The various sects of the alliance also had the authority to restrict and dispatch the forces of various sections. This was a very important change. As a result, the secret alliance had become more powerful. It could be said that its cohesion had reached a new level. Originally, Many divine kings were very reluctant to hand over their power. However, after seeing Yi Shiwen wipe out the Great Freedom King in one battle, they didn't have any other thoughts. One by one, they handed over a portion of their authority. Of course, they had to hand over all of their authority. That would require time to slowly adjust, and it was impossible for them to take over all of their authority at once. Yi Shiwen didn't stop to rest after completing the entire alliance meeting. He went straight to the alliance headquarters. Compared to 100 years ago, it was completely different. 100 years ago, the Tian clan had just been released, and they invaded everywhere. It could be said that their invasion was like fire, and the 10,000 worlds were caught off guard. And now, after hundreds of years, all the major forces had completely recovered and stabilized. Although the celestial race had occupied a large portion of the universe, there were no signs of further collapse. Although the flames of war were not as intense as before, the battles between the two sides for many strategic locations were more bloody and cruel. The repeated battles of a world required countless troops to be invested. This kind of battle for position was the most bloody and competitive. It was no longer effective for a single-person surprise attack. Battles between large armies were common in the past hundreds of years. Military experts emerged endlessly from all over the world. Such a chaotic world was the battlefield for their cultivation. They could get the most abundant growth in the chaos of war. The road from the Alliance headquarters to the Hidden Valley was relatively calm in general. The Tian clan didn't harass everywhere, because they would wait for the Alliance forces to react and launch a large-scale battle. Then, the Tian clan wouldn't have so many troops scattered. Both sides were obviously planning to finish the battle in one go. Surprise attacks everywhere wouldn't help to solve the opponent's main force, and it wouldn't solve the whole problem. However, because they were afraid of the strength of the other side, neither side acted rashly. In other words, they were still gathering their strength and striving to solve the other side in one go. Yi Shiwen quickly arrived at the Alliance headquarters. At this time, the Alliance headquarters had been divided into two worlds. One side was the Alliance headquarters, and the other side was the current base camp of the Tian clan. It was built directly outside the Alliance headquarters, and it was tit for tat. Obviously, the Tian clan intended to block the Alliance headquarters. Both sides were at daggers drawn, and traces of fighting could be seen everywhere. Although the armies of both sides didn't make a move, the collisions of small-scale patrols could be seen constantly. Yi Shiwen had just arrived at the battlefield, and he clearly felt that several quasi-emperor-level divine senses swept over. Obviously, the entire battlefield was under their surveillance so that they wouldn't be caught off guard. However, they only swept a little. At this time, Yi Shiwen was only showing the strength of a peak divine king. Although it was worth paying attention, it wasn't enough to change the balance of the battlefield. Naturally, they didn't feel anything. Yi Shiwen looked at the tents of both sides. The fortresses were like the sands of the Ganges River, endless. The war potential of both sides had been stimulated to the extreme, but because there was no Emperor King level master in charge, they didn't have the ability to break the formation alone. The Great Freedom Heaven was so arrogant, but it was only able to retreat from the Alliance headquarters unscathed. It couldn't break the formation at all. Yi Shiwen was a high-level member of the Alliance, so he naturally had a way to enter. However, when he entered, he saw a large group of people coming out of the Alliance headquarters, and the person leading was none other than the nightmare that Yi Shiwen had defeated previously. Seeing Yi Shiwen now, it was like meeting an enemy, and its eyes were exceptionally red. "It's you." The nightmare immediately recognized Yi Shiwen, and its eyes turned red. Yi Shiwen defeated it, broke the heaven-devouring devil jar, and snatched the word devil from it. To it, this was a great humiliation, and even the entire original demon clan suffered a great humiliation. "So it's you." Yi Shiwen narrowed his eyes and didn't take it to heart. Many years ago, he wasn't afraid of the nightmare, and 100 years later, he naturally had even less to worry about. "Yi Shiwen, you still dare to show up?" The nightmare's eyes suddenly bloomed with bursts of intense light. The entire army's advance stopped because of this unforeseen event. Everyone was a little puzzled. What's wrong with the nightmare? Why is he releasing such shocking hostility? Why wouldn't I dare to show up? Is the Alliance headquarters already under the control of the original demon clan? Yi Shiwen sneered. I advise you not to ask for a snub. If you want to fight, then I can accompany you. 100 years ago, you weren't my match, and even more so now. The nightmare was immediately seething with anger, and it was burning with rage. Yi Shiwen didn't even bother to look at him. Although he looked very pitiful, but 100 years ago, if he couldn't stop him, he didn't know how he would have been dealt with. The competition in this world was so cruel. Yi Shiwen, don't be too arrogant. In this world, there will always be people who can deal with you. If you're too arrogant, there will be a day when you'll receive retribution. The nightmare's eyes instantly turned into demon eyes. Retribution? Ha! You actually believe this? Yi Shiwen laughed loudly. Nightmare, you're also a veteran quasi-emperor. You know what's right and wrong in this matter. I don't want to say anything more. Right now, a great enemy is in front of us. Otherwise, do you think you can keep your life? Yi Shiwen, what did you say? The nightmare's eyes seemed to be spewing fire. Nightmare, this is the brat who defeated you? He's really arrogant. At this moment, a proud voice came from afar. In just a moment, a few figures walked over from afar and directly arrived in front of the two. Yi Shiwen looked over and saw two old men and an old woman. Every one of them looked extremely ugly. Among the two old men, one had pitch-black scales all over his body, while the other had the appearance of a human, but his face was full of wrinkles, and he was basically skin and bones. Heavenly Monster, 3 Elders. Yi Shiwen immediately stated the origins of these 3 people. To him, these 3 people weren't difficult to distinguish. They were really too famous. Among so many quasi-emperors, they were considered prominent. Originally, the 3 of them weren't like this. After all, as dignified, extraordinary figures, maintaining a youthful appearance wasn't difficult at all. Even if some people didn't care about these changes to their skin and flesh, it was rare for them to become so ugly. However, these 3 people were an exception. The 3 of them could be said to be of the same breadth and branches. Basically, wherever they went, the 3 of them could be seen together. Thus, as time passed, the 3 of them began to gradually become famous. However, the thing that really made them famous was that the 3 of them had entered a secret realm together. No one knew what they had accidentally eaten, but they ended up like this. However, their cultivation had improved greatly. They had advanced from an ordinary peak divine king to a quasi-emperor level expert in one go. However, although they knew that there was such a fortuitous encounter, ordinary people rarely tried it. Because although they could enter the quasi-emperor realm, there was no possibility of advancing further. Basically, divine kings wouldn't choose this path. Because unlike mortals, the life of a god was endless. Sooner or later, they would break through, so there was no need to do such a thing. Of course, it was also because the Heavenly Monster 3 Elders were tight-lipped about this matter. They wouldn't say anything to anyone who asked, so the specific situation became a kind of secret that no one knew. Moreover, although the 3 of them couldn't advance further, the 3 of them were of the same breath. This was also why many people were unwilling to provoke them. Chapter 28:19. If it was only one of them, it would not be so difficult to deal with. However, when the 3 of them were like brothers, advancing and retreating together, the problem became very troublesome. Even quasi-emperors who were stronger than them would not be willing to provoke the 3 of them if they joined forces. Moreover, because the 3 of them could not improve, their tempers had become very surly. Ordinary people would really want to avoid them as far as possible if they met them. Therefore, they were usually so unscrupulous. Many people hated them, but they could not do anything to them. So, you still know us? Hee, what a handsome young man. At this time, the old woman spoke, her eyes shining. At this time, although Yi Shiwen's appearance was not particularly outstanding, the more his cultivation deepened, the more he naturally had an indescribable charm. No peerless handsome man could compare to him. The old woman was like an old glutton who had not eaten for many years, her eyes shining. A look of disgust flashed in Yi Shiwen's eyes. This old woman's reputation was also very bad. It was unknown how many gigolos she kept on a daily basis. Each and every one of them was a famous handsome man in their respective clans. Many of them had been caught by her, but some of them had volunteered. After all, not everyone had the qualifications and ability to be a gigolos for a quasi-emperor. However, it was fine if she was looking for someone else, but she actually dared to look for him. She was really courting death. Did she really think that he was an ordinary god? Old witch, I advise you not to look for trouble. Otherwise, don't blame me for being impolite. Yi Shiwen narrowed his eyes and said, "What?" The old woman's body suddenly became cold, and her expression was extremely ugly. At this time, her originally ugly face became even uglier. How could she not know that her face was ugly? However, after becoming like this, not only did she not stop, on the contrary, she became even more aggressive. Her mood was surly. She knew that she was ugly, but she did not hide it. She insisted that each and every one of her gigolos be outstanding and beheaded them all if they did not go her way. She never tolerated disobedience, and in her eyes, Yi Shiwen was not much better. At this moment, seeing that Yi Shiwen actually dared to talk to her like this, her expression suddenly became extremely ugly. Yi Shiwen did not give her the slightest face, and immediately said, "Umph. I think you are all so old and don't remember things. Do you think that I am your gigolos? You can do whatever you want." "Kid, I think you're definitely going to be my gigolo," the old woman said with an ugly expression. Her robes fluttered and her shriveled body could be vaguely seen. What a joke. Heavenly strange three elders. Are you going to refuse my kindness? Yi Shiwen saw that the other two old men were actually surrounding him at the same time and seemed to be besieging him. Others are afraid of you because they find you troublesome, like stinky dog shit, and are unwilling to step on you. But if you fall into my hands, then you won't have a choice. What an arrogant brat. Nightmare. No wonder you want to take care of him. Today, we heavenly monsters, three elders, will help you teach this brat a lesson and let him understand the immensity of heaven and earth. At that moment, Elder So, one of the heavenly freak trio, spoke up. The scales all over his body were trembling, and they emitted waves of black light. That's right, brat. In this world, it's not your turn to be arrogant. Elder So also began to speak at that moment. Nightmare had no intention of participating. He also had matters to attend to and could not delay here. Moreover, he did not like the heavenly freak trio and hated Yi Shiwen even more. It would naturally be best if both sides fought to the death. In his opinion, Yi Shiwen would definitely win in a one-on-one battle. The heavenly freak trio could not even defeat him, let alone Yi Shiwen, who defeated him. If Yi Shiwen was defeated in their hands, it would be a huge joke. However, the situation would be completely different if the three of them joined hands. In fact, even Yi Shiwen would have an incomparable headache. He knew very well that the three of them had been working together for millions of years. So, they had a set of joint attack techniques that allowed them to advance and retreat at the same time. In fact, they were even more tyrannical than the three of them. Even Yi Shiwen wouldn't be willing to provoke them. So, it would be good to let Yi Shiwen suffer a little. It would be best if he could find a way to take back the word demon. Otherwise, he would not be able to explain to his ancestors. Heavenly Freak Trio, it seems like you've overestimated yourselves. Fine, I'll tell you today what kind of enemy you can't afford to provoke. Yi Shiwen sneered. What an arrogant brat. The Heavenly Freak Trio attacked instantly. The three of them spoke at the same time, but it was as if they were one person's voice. The three of them were like brothers and of one mind very easily. This was something that could only be achieved after tens of thousands of years of tacit understanding. It was difficult to tell which side was the real leader, or perhaps all three of them were the real leader. Rumble. Three terrifying forces instantly swept away everything and rushed over. The power of the three of them intertwined together and expanded continuously. The three of them attacked together, and did not intend to underestimate Yi Shiwen. Although the three of them had a bad temper, they were not stupid. The news of Yi Shiwen defeating Nightmare spread quickly in the Quasi-Emperor's circle. The fastest way to become famous was to step on the corpses of old people. Unfortunately, Nightmare became such a person, so Yi Shiwen also received the attention of many people. Although the three of them were very strong when they joined forces, they knew that Nightmare was very strong and was far from an ordinary Quasi-Emperor. Moreover, he had the incomplete devouring heaven demon jar in his hand. In the same realm, he was basically invincible. But even so, he was still defeated by Yi Shiwen. It was imaginable how powerful Yi Shiwen was. If they still dared to underestimate Yi Shiwen, then they were not confident and unruly, but clearly idiots. The power of the three seemed to have reversed the power of heaven and earth. Heaven and earth were shocked, and the entire Alliance headquarters was instantly shaken. In an instant, countless experts swept their divine senses over. The attack of three Quasi-Emperor-level experts had completely alarmed the entire Coalition Army headquarters. Many people even thought that the Sky Race had attacked and were extremely nervous for a moment. Yi Shiwen did not dodge or evade. He took the combined attack of the three people head-on. Rumble! The entire world was shaking violently. The army that had gathered together was actually starting to be thrown into disarray by the spreading aura. The huge aura condensed by the powerful army was also scattered. Ordinary god kings did not dare to rush into the formation at all. They would be killed by this terrifying army. But a Quasi-Emperor was different. A Quasi-Emperor-level expert could surpass such an existence. Nightmare hurriedly dispersed his aura, protecting the army within it. Otherwise, the entire army would scatter. All of these attacks fell on Yi Shiwen's body. However, it was like a clay ox entering the sea. All of them were absorbed by Yi Shiwen. It was as if Yi Shiwen's body had thousands of big mouths, and all of their attacks were completely swallowed. Is the legendary heavenly monster three elders only at this level? That's really disappointing. Yi Shiwen said coldly. Impossible, the old woman said in disbelief. In her opinion, it was simply impossible. When the three of them joined forces, even nightmares would be defeated, even with the devouring devil jar. Yet, Yi Shiwen actually withstood their attacks without moving at all. This was simply the most unbelievable thing. The other two were also in disbelief. They were the clearest about their attacks. At the same time, they knew very well that they did not hold back at all. Even so, they were still unable to do anything to Yi Shiwen. Suddenly, they felt a chill in their hearts. Only at this level? That's ridiculous. Yi Shiwen smiled coldly. The pressure that the heavenly monster three elders gave Yi Shiwen was not even worth mentioning compared to Nightmare, let alone the pressure that the great freedom heaven gave Yi Shiwen. After all, it was just an external force that entered the Quasi-Emperor realm. It was far from being a match for experts who had truly entered the Quasi-Emperor realm. The only thing that made people a little afraid was the number of people. But this number was nothing to the current Yi Shiwen. He knew that many people's divine senses were sweeping over. Among them, there was no lack of people who wanted to see how much of a Quasi-Emperor's combat power was fake. In this world, only those who had enough strength had enough right to speak. There were also many people who ridiculed him for establishing the Hidden Alliance. They did not take him seriously at all, and some even had the idea of attacking him from behind. Even if they were under the banner of the Allied forces, the conflicts between the various forces would not disappear. They were just temporarily hidden. As long as you can take one punch from me, I will immediately admit defeat, turn around, and leave. Yi Shiwen shouted. What? Bastard, you underestimate us too much. The old woman suddenly became furious. It would have been fine if any of them were not a match for him. After so many years, they had long known that because their combat power was not good, they had to work together. Only by joining forces could the three of them have a foothold in the Quasi-Emperor's circle. But now, Yi Shiwen actually dared to say one punch. The three of them were famous. Could it be that they could not even take one punch from him? At the same time, the Quasi-Emperors who were watching the battle in the dark were also secretly surprised. This Yi Shiwen is a little too arrogant. Even if the heavenly monster three elders are slightly weaker and are not considered powerful quasi-emperors, they should still be able to take one punch from him. He is still too arrogant. These young juniors are more arrogant than the previous one. It's really ridiculous. I would like to see how he can make the heavenly monster three elders unable to take one punch. Whether I'm looking down on you or not, take one punch from me first. Chapter 28:20. Whether or not I'm looking down on you, you'll have to take my punch first. Yi Shiwen's voice seemed to come from all directions at the same time. All the aura on his body instantly swelled up, forming a terrifying aura pillar that soared into the sky. This terrifying aura instantly alarmed both the allied forces and the celestial race allied forces. The aura of an expert who had reached the quasi-emperor level could easily shake the entire battlefield. Even in an extremely chaotic environment, it could not be concealed. Damn it, it's that human named Yi Shiwen. Mahasvara suddenly opened his eyes. He immediately recognized Yi Shiwen's aura. He had just fought with Yi Shiwen with his doppelganger. How could he not recognize Yi Shiwen's aura? He actually dares to come here. At this time, Mahasvara's eyes suddenly burst out bursts of brilliance. His killing intent swept across. In an instant, it seemed as if countless galaxies had collapsed in his eyes because of his anger. Countless thoughts flashed through his mind. He couldn't let this kind of scourge continue to exist. Although he could not leave the battlefield, the situation was naturally completely different if Yi Shiwen came to this battlefield. He could completely kill Yi Shiwen on the battlefield. His real body and his doppelganger were not the same concept at all. The strength of his real body was more than 100 times that of his doppelganger. He was confident that he could easily kill Yi Shiwen. Although he was extremely angry now, he didn't act rashly because he knew that if he couldn't kill Yi Shiwen in one go because he acted rashly, then it wouldn't be so easy for Yi Shiwen to kill him the next time Yi Shiwen was on guard. After all, this was not the Hidden Valley. In the Allied Forces headquarters, there were still existences that even he was afraid of. It was impossible for him to act unscrupulously. Even he himself did not realize that he had already regarded Yi Shiwen as a thorn in his side. He wanted to get rid of Yi Shiwen as soon as possible. It was not just that kind of fear, but also a kind of worry. He was worried that Yi Shiwen would grow out of control. In other words, even he himself was a little afraid and uncertain about Yi Shiwen's future. 6 paths of reincarnation fist. Yi Shiwen blasted out a punch. The powerful fist power instantly tore the sky and covered the world in an instant. It swept away everything in its path. Suddenly, the 3 heavenly freaks elders felt Yi Shiwen's terrifying strength. They could already feel the unparalleled pressure before the fist energy even arrived. Damn it, how can he be so powerful? The heavenly monster's 3 elders roared again and again. Even quasi-emperor level experts like them could not withstand it and had the urge to kneel down. They were suppressed by the fist force, and the surrounding laws were not under their control at all. They were out of their control in an instant. It was ridiculous that he had previously wanted to take back the word devil from Yi Shiwen. Now that he thought about it, it was simply wishful thinking. There was no possibility at all. As time passed, the probability of him seizing the word devil from Yi Shiwen became lower. On the contrary, Yi Shiwen's strength would only become stronger and his chances would become slimmer. How could he be so strong? The nightmare still couldn't believe it. Even if he had great luck, this kind of progress speed was a little too shocking. At this moment, his mind was already blank and he didn't know what to say. He really felt like the sky was falling and the earth was sinking, just like when Yi Shiwen had just taken the word devil. He still clearly remembered that feeling of despair. At this moment, many quasi-emperor big shots in the Alliance headquarters were also speechless for a while. Many people didn't care about this junior who had just joined their circle. But now it seemed that this young junior was not as weak as they thought. In fact, he was even stronger than many of them. He was not a quasi-emperor, but he was better than a quasi-emperor. Yi Shiwen's appearance in front of everyone this time could be said to be extremely amazing. No one could treat him as an insignificant nobody anymore. In the eyes of many people, It was simply a self-formed alliance of jumping clowns. Now, it didn't seem so ridiculous. Perhaps it still lacked a certain foundation, but a strong leader was enough to make up for many shortcomings. Many divine senses that had been locked on Yi Shiwen's body had also quietly withdrawn. They might not have had a problem with this if he had been a weakling. However, they had dared to lock their divine senses on an expert. This was undoubtedly a kind of provocation. With just a punch, Yi Shiwen had established his position. They didn't dare to treat Yi Shiwen as a weak person anymore. Instead, they treated him as a fellow who they could communicate with and discuss doubt with. That was enough. Yi Shiwen's goal had also been achieved. This was his most fundamental goal. Some positions were not given by others, but fought for by oneself. After sending the heavenly monster's 3 elders flying with one punch, Yi Shiwen was expressionless. It was as if he had done something insignificant and had no difficulty at all. Then he quickly walked into the Alliance headquarters. No one dared to stop him. After entering, Yi Shiwen immediately went to find the Flame Lord. As the liaison between the Hidden Valley and the Hidden Alliance in the Alliance headquarters, the Flame Lord still had a lot of things to do. Fortunately, he could split out an avatar to handle them. His original body was still cultivating. In just over 100 years, his cultivation level had improved a lot. Originally, he had already reached the peak of the mid-stage king-ranked realm. Now, he had broken through to the late-stage king-ranked realm. Although it wasn't very stable yet, he was already considered an expert among the many godly kings. He wasn't at the bottom. His authority in the entire Alliance headquarters had also increased greatly. Junior Brother Yi, you were very impressive just now. Haha, that was very satisfying. The Flame Lord's smile was still very bright. They are just a few blind ghosts, Yi Shiwen said nonchalantly. Only Junior Brother would dare to say such words. The few people you mentioned are all-powerful quasi-emperors. There are not many people in the entire universe who would dare to say that they can suppress them. The Flame Lord laughed loudly. It seemed like only Yi Shiwen would dare to say that quasi-thearchs were just ordinary ghosts, even if they were quasi-thearchs who had ascended unconventionally. Senior Brother, I am here mainly to understand the recent situation, Yi Shiwen asked. He was planning to go into seclusion in the near future. However, he was really worried about the current situation. The heavenly race was giving him a lot of pressure, especially the whereabouts of the rebellious D. It was a mystery and had become the biggest hidden danger for the Alliance army. Without a Tharch around, both sides could still fight to a draw. However, once a Tharch got involved, the entire situation would change because of one person. Recently, the situation has stabilized. However, the number of deaths and injuries is even more serious than before. The Flame Lord said, especially our Hidden Valley. We have suffered even more casualties. Less than 1/3 of the disciples who have come to train over the years have survived. Chapter 28-21. Why are there so many losses? Yi Shiwen narrowed his eyes. He was well-read and could be said to be an all-rounder. He was also well-versed in military matters. It was normal for 2 armies to suffer slightly more losses in a battle, but if the losses were more than half, then it could already be considered a bloody battle. But if the losses were more than 2/3, then this was no longer a bloody battle, but a battle to the death. In 1 or 2 battles, it was not strange for them to fight to the death when they encountered strong opponents or were surrounded. But if they suffered such high losses over a long period of time, then it was completely abnormal. If this ratio was used to calculate the losses of the entire coalition army, then it could even be said that the entire coalition army had collapsed on the spot without needing to fight. But according to what he saw along the way, although the battles between the 2 sides were bloodier and more intense, overall, they were only small skirmishes. They were still at the stage where they continued to exert their strength. Both sides were using their trump cards and reviving their foundation, but this all required time. In other words, it was impossible for such a shocking ratio of casualties to occur at this stage. One look, and one could tell that there was a problem. There's nothing we can do. These few batches of disciples that have been transferred over have all suffered heavy casualties. You know, the headquarters of the coalition army. Some of the most dangerous missions are given to ordinary king-level sects like us to handle. The Lord of Flames said with a bitter smile. If the original coalition army was still under the control of the divine kings, then now the headquarters of the coalition army was already under the control of the quasi-emperors. While the king-level sects were naturally awe-inspiring on normal days, and any of their divine kings could shake the world when they were sent out, they could not be compared to the quasi-emperors at all. They had to listen to the orders of those old quasi-emperors, and they had no right to speak at all. Yi Shiwen was not stupid and very quickly figured out the problem. Obviously, they were being used as cannon fodder. The king-level sects were usually awe-inspiring, and they even had divine kings to oversee them, who would dare to use them as cannon fodder. But it was different now. Under the righteous cause of fighting against the heavenly race, everyone had to obey the deployment of the higher-ups of the coalition army, and there was no way they could resist. Otherwise, just the crime of offending the Sky-Reaching clan would be too much to bear, and even a king-level sect could collapse. And in this aspect, the sects that had produced quasi-emperors or the lineages of the emperor lords had a natural advantage, and no one could be compared to them. If there was a dangerous mission, they could only do it. Although there was the righteousness of fighting against the Tian clan, this kind of scheming was everywhere and had never stopped. After all, they were old enemies who had fought for millions of years, tens of millions of years. How could it be that easy to put down their grudges at this time? Junior brother, you should know that we, the Hidden Valley, have always believed in independence and not relying on anyone, the Master of Flames said helplessly. Yi Shiwen naturally understood what he meant. Normally, he could rely on his neutral policy to benefit from both sides. Even an emperor's inheritance wouldn't casually offend a king's sect. However, this was a huge problem at this time. Being impartial meant that you wouldn't offend anyone, but at the same time, it also meant that no one would speak up for you. If you died, you would die in vain. In the two battles against the heavens, many sects and races had mysteriously disappeared like this. Entire clans and sects had been annihilated by the heavenly race. In this chaotic world, not having a strong backer was a huge problem in itself. Senior brother, the problem you mentioned is indeed very serious. But I've thought about it. Yi Shiwen nodded and said, "Release my words. The normal mission, fighting against the Tian clan, is the unshirkable responsibility of the Hidden Valley. However, if anyone wants to use us as cannon fodder again, then I will let them understand that the Hidden Valley isn't that easy to mess with." That's great. The Flame Sovereign nodded. The consecutive batches of elite disciples that had been transferred over had suffered shocking losses. To a certain extent, it had dampened the enthusiasm of those disciples. Being transferred over to the headquarters meant death. Who will want to come over in the future? This also made him very distressed, but there was no way to solve it. He was a divine king late. Although he seemed to have a good status, he had no right to speak in the Alliance headquarters at this time. However, the situation was different if Yi Shiwen stepped forward. Yi Shiwen, who had just defeated the heavenly monster Three Elders, was now in the limelight. Naturally, Yi Shiwen's words were more useful than the Master of Flames. "I would like to ask, do you know the whereabouts of the NID now?" Yi Shiwen asked. "As far as I know, there isn't. Now that the Masters have returned and taken over the headquarters, the first thing they did was to prioritize the search for the Inverse Emperor clan. However, after a few decades, there hasn't been any news at all," the Lord of Flames said. Those quasi-emperors were naturally not fools. They were also very clear that although the Tian clan army was strong, they couldn't do anything. At worst, it would just be a stalemate. However, if one day the NID became an emperor, then everything would be too late. In the situation where there was no Emperor King, the Alliance's current line of defense would collapse instantly. There was only half a step between a quasi-emperor and an Emperor King, but this half step was like heaven and earth. No one could compete with it. Yi Shiwen sighed slightly. With the protection of those Tian clan experts who were sealed, it would be difficult to find the whereabouts of the NID. Even if they found it, it would be difficult to succeed. The NID, who had the hope of becoming an emperor, would definitely be under strict protection. Junior brother, you had just come out of seclusion. Are you going to take charge of many things in the Hidden Alliance now? The Master of Flames asked. No, there are many things in the Secret Alliance. With the help of all the senior brothers, I am naturally very relieved. My priority now is to focus on my cultivation. Other things are actually trivial. Yishuan asked. That's right. That's true. Junior brother is different from us. For us, on the road of cultivation, it is harder to go further. However, Junior brother's strength is extraordinary, and you have not reached the bottleneck yet. Naturally, you should put all your energy into cultivation. In the future, when you achieve the Great Way, we can also benefit from it. The Master of Flames nodded and said with a look of approval. After witnessing Yi Shiwen's cultivation progress by leaps and bounds every once in a while, even someone as calm as him couldn't help but have a crazy thought in his heart. Perhaps Yi Shiwen really has the possibility of further attaining the Great Way. At that time, the entire Hidden Valley would follow Yi Shiwen to the top. This was definitely not a joke. Yi Shiwen smiled faintly and didn't say much. Others might not know, but how could he not know? How could he not have a bottleneck in cultivation? It was just that he constantly had fortuitous encounters that raised his cultivation. That was why it seemed like there were no bottlenecks in the eyes of others. He didn't know when he would stop. In fact, even he was a little looking forward to it. To be able to reach a level that no one had ever reached before, and no one would be able to do so in the future. That would be his greatest wish. I hope that senior brother will keep what I am going to say next a secret, Yi Shiwen said seriously. Junior brother, please speak. The Master of Flames said, I have already cultivated to the peak of the Divine King realm, and have touched the peak of this realm. The next step is to attract the Boundary Emperor Tribulation. Only after passing the Boundary Emperor Tribulation will I be able to improve further. Yi Shiwen said. The Master of Flames' expression immediately turned solemn. To divine kings like them, the Boundary Emperor Tribulation was no different from a test of life and death. Many divine kings had never advanced further in their entire lives. Chapter 28-22. In short, over the years, Yi Shiwen's enemies could be said to be everywhere. In the past, Yi Shiwen had defeated or killed countless opponents. Under normal circumstances, with Yi Shiwen's strength, they would not dare to do anything even if they were 10 times more courageous. However, if he was in a critical situation, it would be completely different. Not only those who had enmity with Yi Shiwen, but also those who disliked him and felt that he was too arrogant and domineering. The reason why the 3 elders of Heaven's monsters targeted Yi Shiwen in a weird way was because they were unconvinced and displeased with Yi Shiwen. In the eyes of many older quasi-emperor experts, Yi Shiwen was still too arrogant. They did not care about the cause and effect of the matter. The important thing was that Yi Shiwen could be said to have advanced bravely over the years and defeated many opponents. These people might not be much to Yi Shiwen, but they were involved in a lot of things. These people might not be able to accomplish anything, but they were more than enough to spoil things. These were the problems that Yi Shiwen was worried about. This time, it was crucial for him to cross the quasi-emperor tribulation. Once he succeeded, his strength would have a qualitative leap. Even if he did not use the time robe, the Mahasvara would not be able to kill him. At that time, unless a real emperor took action, he really did not need to be afraid of anyone. Because of this, he had to be more cautious. He could not lose, and there was no way out. As far as the Flame Lord was concerned, it would be a great thing for the entire Hidden Valley if Yi Shiwen could take this crucial step. At that time, Yi Shiwen would not be a divine king with the combat power of a quasi-emperor, but a real quasi-emperor. This was a completely different concept. A real quasi-emperor had some power that a divine king did not have. This could not be made up for with tyrannical combat power. Moreover, only by stepping into the quasi-emperor realm would one really have the opportunity to attack that legendary realm. A divine king would always be a divine king, and would never be able to attack that legendary realm. This was the most basic. This matter is very important. It is not enough to just keep it a secret. A quasi-emperor is going against the natural order, and all kinds of tribulations cannot be avoided. It is useless to just keep it a secret, Yi Shiwen said. At the level of quasi-emperor, it was no longer as simple as going against the natural order. If one wanted to break through, they would also face various external and internal threats. As a result, to many god kings, this was a death tribulation. It was extremely dangerous. Only the legacies of sovereign kings with extremely great heritage could assist god kings in their tribulation. Over time, most of the quasi-emperors could only come from the inheritances of these powerful emperors. On the other hand, the chances of a god king who did not inherit the legacy of a sovereign emperor to survive the quasi-emperor tribulation were simply too small. At most, they would be lucky. However, Yi Shiwen didn't expect this kind of luck to happen to him. However, it wasn't as if he didn't have anything to rely on. The two intact Dao artifacts were his greatest source of confidence. Otherwise, he wouldn't even consider making another breakthrough in such a short period of time. If he wanted to make further breakthroughs in a short period of time, he would definitely be suppressed by many people. Junior brother, are you looking for help? At this moment, the Flame Master came to his senses and asked. Yes, that's right. I came to the Alliance headquarters this time to look for help. Yi Shiwen sighed softly. This was the result of not having a powerful sect to rely on. Although he had friendly relations with a few immortal emperor's legacies, this matter could be said to be entrusting his life to them. How could he not be cautious? Initially, they seemed to be getting along well. However, once they found out about his matter, it was very likely that their attitudes would change. The Flame Master didn't say much. In this matter, he couldn't help much. He couldn't even help the Hidden Valley or even the entire Hidden Alliance. The only people that Yi Shiwen could trust and rely on now were Yi Mo and Yi Wudi, who had awakened the spirit of the Avicii sword. These two people were existences that Yi Shiwen could trust unreservedly. He already knew that Yi Mo was one step ahead of him and had directly passed the quasi-emperor tribulation decades ago to become a quasi-emperor. This wasn't difficult for Yi Mo. After all, his original strength was far superior to this. Now that he was just recovering, it was naturally much easier than Yi Shiwen's breakthrough. Although Yi Wudi's strength wasn't at the level of a quasi-emperor, he had the Demon Emperor's Bell, which was enough to increase Yi Shiwen's combat strength and block a quasi-emperor. These weren't a problem. The remaining people that Yi Shiwen had friendly relations with were probably the Martial Sect and the Ancient Phoenix Realm. Although he was now the son-in-law of the Ancient Phoenix Realm, the Ancient Phoenix Realm wasn't under the control of the Phoenix King now. Even he didn't know if there would be any changes along the way. The current ruler of the Ancient Phoenix Realm had some grievances with him. Therefore, after thinking for a long time, Yi Shiwen still excluded the Ancient Phoenix Realm. Then, only the Martial Sect was left to fight for. Ever since he had interacted with the Martial Sect had given him a lot of help. Although there were some conflicts, generally speaking, it wasn't a big deal. If he could get the full help of the Martial Sect, he would undoubtedly have a much better chance of surviving this quasi-emperor tribulation. Every time he thought of this, Yi Shiwen couldn't help but sigh. It was a pity that his foundation was still too shallow. The time he had been rising was too short, compared to the other top experts, which one of them didn't have friends all over the world. Since ancient times, there weren't many people like him. Who is the current head of the Martial Sect in the Alliance headquarters? Yi Shiwen asked. The main person in charge of the Martial Sect in the headquarters is Senior Beggar God, the Flame Lord said. Is that so? That's great. Yi Shiwen's eyes lit up. Although he also had friendly relations with Ji Renwang and the others in the Martial Sect, his relationship with the Beggar God was undoubtedly better. If he could get the Beggar God's support, then things would be half settled. Apart from the Beggar God, there is also Senior Fire Dragon in the Alliance headquarters. However, he doesn't care about mundane matters. He only needs to deal with the Freedom Heaven and the others in the headquarters. The Flame Lord introduced them one by one to Yi Shiwen. The Fire Dragon Lord? The one in the Fire Dragon Palace? Yi Shiwen asked. Yes, that's right. The Flame Lord nodded and said. There was a bit of admiration in his eyes. Yi Shiwen couldn't help but take a deep breath. He didn't expect that there was such a senior in the Alliance headquarters. In the heaven realm, he also had some connections with the outstanding disciples of the Fire Dragon Palace. The Fire Dragon Palace and the martial sect were originally of the same breath. They advanced and retreated together. The ancestor of the Fire Dragon Palace, the Fire Dragon Lord, was said to be a real fire dragon. He established the Fire Dragon Palace, which was considered as an independent branch outside of the Dragon Island. Since ancient times, only the Fire Dragon Lord was able to do it. Because of the existence of the Dragon Island, all the dragons were not allowed to establish their own sects outside. It wasn't a big deal to rule one's own territory. However, all the dragons had to submit to the rule of the Dragon Island. There were no exceptions. Only the Fire Dragon Lord was able to do it. He also had a great background. During the process of the Qin Emperor's conquest of the world, he was an important right-hand man of the Qin Emperor. It was unknown how many contributions he had made. Later on, he established the Fire Dragon Palace, and the Qin Emperor's support was indispensable. If it wasn't for the suppression of the Qin Emperor, the Dragon Island wouldn't have let it go. The Fire Dragon Palace was independent of the martial sect. However, they were connected by marriage for many years. They were already two sides of the same coin. Everyone knew that both sides were of the same breath. The ancestor of the Fire Dragon Palace hadn't stepped into the secular world for many years after the disappearance of the Qin Emperor. There was even a rumor that he had left with the Qin Emperor. However, no one expected that he would reappear when the heavens were being invaded by the heavenly race. However, Yi Shiwen felt that it was normal. Fiery Dragon Lord had been one of the top experts under the Emperor realm when the Emperor of Qin was still on the throne. So, his martial power must have become even more profound after so many years. Only such an existence could suppress a lawless person like the Mahasvara. It was no wonder that the martial sect had been safe and sound for so many years. There had been storms, but they hadn't turned into a big disaster. The martial sect didn't have a deep foundation, but it only had such an old monster to oversee it. So, who could create a big wave? The martial sect had been established the latest among so many emperor inheritances, so it could be said that its foundation was the shallowest. However, it was more likely that it had retained more super experts. In fact, it might even be the strongest emperor inheritances in the world. Junior brother, if you can ask the Fire Dragon Lord to lend you a hand, then those demons and monsters won't be enough, the Flame Lord said. Needless to say, the situation would be as stable as Mount Tai if the Flame Lord could help. However, I'm afraid it won't be easy to ask a senior like the Fire Dragon Lord to lend me a hand. Yi Shiwen frowned and said, "It's impossible for others. But you're different. The Fire Dragon Palace and the martial sect are closely related." The Fire Dragon Lord had followed the will of the Qin Emperor when he had appeared in front of the people in the early years. He had supported many heroes of the human race. You may be the Hidden Valley's Lord, but you're also a rising star of the younger generation of the human race. The martial sect has helped you several times. So, it's not certain that the Fire Dragon Lord won't help you, the Flame Lord said. Yi Shiwen nodded. This was also the reason why the martial sect had helped him several times. He wasn't a disciple of the martial sect. However, he was a descendant of the human race. In this world where race was the standard of measurement, it was also a kind of luck to belong to a powerful race. Senior brother is right. I must give it a try no matter what. I must see how much strength I can borrow from the martial sect, Yi Shiwen said with determination. Chapter 28-23. For Yi Shiwen now, every bit of power was extremely important. Yi Shiwen did not lack the power of ordinary experts. In the demon summoning banner, he had as much as he wanted. However, such power was useless in the face of a quasi-emperor level expert. After all, the demon summoning banner was not in its complete state. Otherwise, it could block a quasi-emperor. Yi Shiwen stopped at the Flame Lord's side for a while. Then he rushed to the ancient Heavenly Court's encampment in the Alliance Army headquarters. Although many people were paying attention to him, no one found it strange. The relationship between Yi Shiwen and the Lord of the ancient Heavenly Court, Yi Wudi, had long been known by everyone. As the status and strength of both sides continued to rise, it had become a well-known secret from the beginning. Only a few people had paid attention to it. Yi Shiwen returned to the Alliance headquarters. His first stop was naturally the Hidden Valley, and his second was the ancient Heavenly Court. This was not surprising. In the Alliance headquarters, Yi Wudi's original body was not there. Only a spirit incarnation was here. Yi Shiwen did not hide anything and immediately told him his plan. Damn, you're too fast. You're actually going through the quasi-emperor tribulation. Yi Wudi looked at Yi Shiwen speechlessly. Originally, Yi Shiwen was lagging behind him, but now he was one step ahead of him. He could not help but feel a little emotional. Yi Shiwen's speed of improvement was too monstrous. Although he had expected such a day, he was still extremely emotional when it really happened. I didn't expect it either. I've had a lot of fortuitous encounters recently, Yi Shiwen said while laughing. Do you know that you're asking for a beating? Yi Wudi said angrily. How many years has it been for me to have a fortuitous encounter? You've had fortuitous encounters one after another. This is not the point. Are you still in seclusion? Can you come out and help me? Yi Shiwen asked. I have no choice now. I was provoked by you. I want to break through to the quasi-emperor realm in one breath. Yi Wudi said, but it doesn't mean that I can't help you. I can ask the Demon Emperor Bell to help you. It's definitely more powerful than me. Aren't you going to seclusion? If I take away the Demon Emperor Bell, then who will protect you? Yi Shiwen asked. Among the many inheritances that had produced monarchs, the declining ancient heavenly court was undoubtedly the weakest one. The ancient heavenly court had been destroyed for a long time, so it couldn't be said to have any foundation. Although there were still some remaining experts from the era of the Demon Emperor compared to the other inheritances of monarchs, they were still relatively weak. If they didn't have the protection of the Demon Emperor's bell, the danger could be said to have reached an unprecedented level. It might be fine on normal days, but if this matter was known by the Tian clan, as long as they charged, the ancient heavenly court would fall again, and Yi Wudi would also be in danger. Yi Shiwen thought of many things in the blink of an eye. Don't worry, I naturally have my own methods. Do you really think that the name of my ancient heavenly court is just for show? Yi Wudi said confidently. And how do you know that the ancient heavenly court only has one Tao artifact? You should know that the ancient heavenly court had more than one demon emperor. Yi Shiwen abruptly opened his eyes. What Yi Wudi had revealed was undoubtedly the greatest secret of the ancient heavenly court. In the outside world, there was not the slightest rumor that the second Tao artifact of the ancient heavenly court had been found. It could be seen how well the ancient heavenly court had kept it a secret. In the ancient heavenly court, there had been more than 2 monarch-level demon emperors at the same time. Coupled with the existence of the Kuanping demon master, the ancient heavenly court's foundation was far beyond ordinary people's imagination. Even old forces like the ancient Phoenix realm and the Dragon Island couldn't compare. It was just that after so many years, people only knew the whereabouts of the Demon Emperor Bell. The other Tao artifacts seemed to have disappeared in the long river of history, never to be seen again. Listening to Yi Wudi's words, it seemed that other Tao artifacts had returned. During this period of time, the ancient heavenly court had been so low-key, so it must be busy with this matter. This kind of information would definitely not be revealed to you casually. Only Yi Shiwen and Yi Wudi, who had been through life and death with each other, would be able to do so. Good. You, the master of the heavenly court, are getting more and more powerful. Yi Shiwen laughed loudly, sincerely happy for him. What do you mean by getting more and more powerful? Compared to a monster like you, I'm still far behind. Moreover, I don't know how long it will take for me to completely grasp the foundation of the heavenly court. It seems that I won't be of much help in this battle. Yi Wudi couldn't help but sigh. He had recovered too late. Although he had been rushing all the way and had consumed countless resources to catch up, advancing to the peak Divine King was already his limit. Not everyone could be compared to Yi Shiwen. In such a chaotic world, those who weren't at the quasi-emperor level didn't have much weight at all. What do you mean by you can't help? When you break through to the quasi-emperor level and have the Demon Emperor Bell in your hand, who would dare to look down on you, the master of the heavenly court? Yi Shiwen said with a slight smile. It was fine if these words could deceive others, but they couldn't fool him. He had personally experienced the situation of using the time robe to fight against a quasi-emperor. Among us, you are the only one who has hoped to catch up with those old monsters in a short period of time and catch up with the progress of the rebellious god. Yi Wudi said, Do you have news about the rebellious god? Yi Shiwen's eyes flashed. Yi Wudi shook his head and said, No, but there are many records in the ancient books of the heavenly court about the opportunity to become an emperor. According to the ancient situation, the rebellious god should have already matured by now. It won't be that easy to kill him. In addition, now that the heavenly race army has been mobilized, it will be difficult to stop him. Only by achieving the Tao together with him can we stop him. Achieving the Tao together with him is easier said than done. Yi Shiwen sighed. Without the opportunity to become an emperor in hand, that realm was an unimaginable chasm for him. He simply didn't dare to imagine it. Anyway, do your best. Haha, I have high hopes for you. Yi Wudi chuckled, as if he wasn't worried about the current situation at all. If even you can't do it, then I don't think anyone in this world can do it. Maybe those old guys have a chance, but the probability is not very high. They already had such strength many years ago. If they could achieve the way, they would have done it long ago. In cultivation, it is important to be brave and diligent. The longer you cultivate, the more useful it will be. Anyway, you don't have to worry about this matter this time. At most, we will use the foundation of the heavenly court to ensure that you get through this. Yi Wudi stopped smiling and said. When he spoke, he was extremely serious, and he had made up his mind. Yi Shiwen's heart was slightly warmed. You don't have to rush to make a move. Wait until I can't hold on anymore. Moreover, this is also a good opportunity. Who is a friend and who is an enemy can be distinguished at a glance, right? At that time, we will catch all those with ulterior motives in one fell swoop to prevent future troubles. Yi Shiwen's eyes flashed with a hint of brilliance. If people knew about this, their jaws would definitely drop. For others, it was a matter of life and death, but he actually wanted to use this opportunity to counterattack. Haha, good. This is the you I know. Yi Wudi slapped the table and laughed. If you don't be a little crazy, I won't even know you. We juniors suddenly rose up, and there are many people who don't like us. This is a good opportunity to get rid of them in one fell swoop. Yi Wudi also had a deep understanding of Yi Shiwen's situation, because he was also facing the same problem. However, as the master of the heavenly court, he could use many more trump cards than Yi Shiwen, so the pressure was also much less. All right, I have already informed your side. After I go to the martial sect, I will go to the heavenly court to pick up Senior Demon Emperor Zhong, and then we will start the tribulation. Yi Shiwen narrowed his eyes and said, You still want to go to the martial sect? Well, other than the heavenly court, the martial sect is the most likely to help you. If you can ask the Fire Dragon Supreme for help, then everything will be settled. Yi Wudi said, but don't get your hopes too high. The Fire Dragon Supreme is in charge of the Alliance headquarters, so he can't leave. Once he leaves, Freedom Heaven and others may take advantage of the situation and send other martial sect experts to help you. It is possible, but the situation is so tense now, and the martial sect doesn't have enough people. You can only try your best. Yi Shiwen nodded. He naturally understood that the current situation was tense, and everyone was short of manpower. It was already very rare that Yi Wudi could support him to this extent. After saying goodbye to Yi Wudi, Yi Shiwen immediately went to the martial sect's encampment in the Alliance headquarters. After reporting, he was allowed to enter. Different from the fallen ancient heavenly court and the hidden valley, as the leader of the human clan in the Alliance headquarters, the martial sect's encampment was extremely vast. The encampment was connected, and it was full of vitality. It was self-sufficient. After reporting his identity, Yi Shiwen was naturally taken to see the beggar god without any trouble. Ha, little Yi, I've been wondering when you would come to me, the beggar god said while sitting in the hall. Compared with the carefree and unrestrained beggar god in the past, the current beggar god was bold and unrestrained, and he gave people a more dignified feeling. Are you not used to this? The beggar god laughed and said, I didn't cultivate this way from the beginning. The beggar god is just a direction of my cultivation. I want to understand life and see through the world of mortals. Now that I've made some progress, I don't need to be like before. I see. So, Yi Shiwen's eyes suddenly lit up. Congratulations, senior. Congratulations, senior. You've finally seen through the barrier and achieved the great way. The beggar god had now entered the quasi-emperor realm, which was a surprise for Yi Shiwen. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.